You've been waking up wrong. They told you to start your day with hustle, goals, noise. Check your phone, drink your coffee, get moving. But have you ever stopped to ask, why? Why do you wake up already stressed? Why does your mind feel heavy before your feet even touch the floor? Why does the day feel like a race you didn't choose to run? The truth is, mornings are sacred, and Buddhism holds the key to unlocking them, not with rules, not with pressure, but with silence, with breath, with presence. For thousands of years, monks, sages, and seekers have known a secret most of the world forgot. The way you wake up is the way you live. If your mornings are chaotic, your life will be too. But if you wake up with stillness, awareness, intention, everything changes. Tonight, as you close your eyes and let these teachings wash over you, something will shift. Your breath will slow, your body will soften, and your mind, that noisy, restless, scattered mind, will begin to clear. You'll remember who you really are underneath it all. Calm, aware, unshaken. And tomorrow morning, when the light returns, you won't just wake up. You'll rise, stronger, clearer, grounded in something deeper than routine. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is a 3-hour journey into the heart of Buddhist wisdom, a reset for your soul, a new way to begin. Are you ready to wake up differently? Let's begin. Before you even move, before you stretch or open your eyes all the way, there's something sacred that happens. Your body begins to breathe, automatically, gently. And yet, most people miss it. The first breath of the day is often ignored, rushed past, or buried under the weight of whatever's coming next. But in Buddhism, this breath is everything. It's not just air entering your lungs, it's life arriving again. It's your first contact with the present moment, your first chance to decide how you want to show up in the world, not through goals or effort, but through awareness. That first breath isn't just a signal that you're alive, it's your first opportunity to live on purpose. Because here's what most people don't realize. The way you breathe at the very start sets a rhythm, not just for your body, but for your nervous system, your mood, your thoughts. It creates a cascade. Fast breath, fast mind, slow breath, grounded presence. The nervous system is still in a soft state when you wake. Your brain is shifting between dream and day. It's open, impressionable. And whatever you feed it, whether calm or chaos, gets carried with you for hours. That's why Buddhists treat waking up as a spiritual threshold, not just the end of sleep, but the beginning of intention. The breath is more than biology. It's the meeting point of your body and your mind. And when you start the day by noticing it, you're saying something powerful. I'm choosing presence before pressure. Most of the time, our attention gets stolen before we even get out of bed. A message, a memory, a plan. But your breath is always here, always offering a choice, to go with the storm or to stay with the silence. In the earliest hours of the morning, monks are already practicing this, not to perform, not to achieve, but to align. In Zen temples, the day begins in stillness. No one talks, no one scrolls. The first action is always inward, and that's the wisdom. Before we face the world, we face ourselves. Through the breath, we make that meeting honest, awake, whole. Even one breath, if taken with awareness, becomes a small act of transformation. It shifts your chemistry. It softens your muscles. It grounds your mind. You don't need a cushion or incense or a teacher. You don't need to do anything but feel the air move in and then move out. That's it. That's the practice. The breath is your teacher, your reset button, your quiet protector. And when you give it your attention, it gives you peace. What's even more powerful is that this isn't about effort. You're not controlling the breath. You're not forcing calm. You're witnessing. You're simply allowing awareness to touch what's already there. That's the heart of Buddhist practice, not to change what is, but to meet it fully. And in doing that, everything shifts. Modern neuroscience now backs this up. When you wake up and immediately move into deep, intentional breathing, your vagus nerve sends messages of safety throughout your body. Your heartbeat stabilizes. Your cortisol, the stress hormone, remains balanced. This isn't a trick. It's your biology responding to attention, to slowness, to care. So when you breathe with awareness, you're literally giving your body permission to feel safe, steady, whole. And a body that feels safe moves through the day with more clarity, more patience, more energy. Not because it's trying, but because it's supported. But beyond biology, there's something more subtle happening. The breath reminds you that you are not your thoughts. When you first wake up, thoughts tend to arrive like a flood. What do I need to do? What went wrong yesterday? What am I afraid of today? But if you stay with your breath instead, you're choosing to observe, to witness. You're not caught in the current. You're watching it pass. That's powerful. That's freedom. Buddhism calls this bare attention. No judgment, no stories, just awareness of what is. And the breath is the perfect place to begin. You'll notice that the breath isn't perfect. It changes. It may feel uneven, tight, shallow. But when you meet it with compassion instead of control, something softens. That compassion is the soil where peace grows. You're telling yourself, even before your day begins, that you are worthy of care, that you can be with yourself as you are. And from that place, resilience blooms. Think of all the mornings you've started with stress. You may not have noticed it, but your breath did. It tensed, it shortened, it prepared for battle. That's what most of us do. We start our day on the defense, reacting before we even rise. But breath awareness flips the script. You're no longer reacting, you're choosing. Choosing to anchor before you float. Choosing to settle before you move. This practice isn't reserved for monks. You don't need a quiet mountain. You need just a moment. Lying in your bed, you bring your attention to the breath. You follow it, not with force, but with curiosity. You feel the inhale, the pause, the exhale. Maybe you do this once, maybe 3 times, maybe 10. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you start here. Over time, you begin to crave it. Your body begins to expect peace instead of panic. You no longer bolt out of bed like you're behind. You rise like someone with purpose, someone with a center. And the more you begin your day this way, the more you return to it during the day. It becomes your baseline, your home. When things get hard, and they will, you know how to come back. Not through effort, but through breath. This is where Buddhism becomes not just philosophy, but experience. You're no longer reading about presence, you're practicing it. And the breath is the gateway. The ancient teachings talk about returning again and again to this moment. Not because you've failed, but because that return is the practice. Every breath is a chance to begin again, especially the first one. You'll find that over time, this changes how you feel about waking up. It's no longer something you dread or delay. It's something you greet. You become curious, open, alive. The day becomes something you meet, not something you survive. That changes everything. It changes your mood, your patience, your energy. But more importantly, it changes your relationship with yourself. You're no longer a stranger waking up into someone else's life. You're here, fully, as you are. And this shows up everywhere. In the way you eat breakfast, in the way you speak to people, in the way you handle chaos. You are steadier, more anchored. And it all started with how you met your breath. The teachings don't ask you to believe, they ask you to look. And when you look closely enough, you begin to see that nothing is separate. Your breath is your body. Your body is your mind. Your mind shapes your actions. Your actions shape your world. So, one breath? It matters more than you think. You'll also notice the layers. With each breath, more awareness unfolds. You feel your chest, your back, your jaw. Maybe there's tension, maybe there's softness. You stay with it. Not to fix, but to feel. And that feeling is what opens you. It's what reconnects you to your aliveness. The morning breath isn't just about calm, it's about truth. It's about returning to the simplicity of being, before emails, before decisions, before roles. And when you meet that place, even briefly, you carry it with you. You walk differently. You speak more gently. You listen more deeply. Not because someone told you to, but because you are rooted in something real. You may be tempted to think this is too simple to matter, but that's the mind talking. The mind loves complexity. But the body, the breath, they love truth. And the truth is, peace doesn't arrive through effort. It arrives through noticing what's already here. And what's already here is breath, life, presence, every single morning. You can make this your ritual, not a rule, not a task, a quiet remembering. Each day, you return, you breathe, you begin again, and in that beginning is everything. So when the world tells you to rush, to grind, to ignore, let your breath answer. Let it say, I choose presence. Let it say, I begin with peace. Let it say, this is my day, and I will meet it awake. No effort, no drama, just breath, just now, just you, stronger, calmer, grounded from the very first moment. And that is the start of something real. And when the day comes to a close, when the breath begins to slow again, and the noise of the world starts to soften, another doorway opens. Just like the breath marks the beginning of your day, sleep marks the closing. But this closing isn't the end. It's a preparation, a transition, a sacred threshold that most people pass through unconsciously, missing the profound power that lives inside it. In Buddhism, sleep isn't just a pause between days. It's a practice, a way of tending to the mind and heart before they dissolve into stillness. The way you fall asleep is deeply connected to the way you wake up. If you go to bed with chaos, you wake up with weight. If you fall asleep with presence, you rise with clarity. That's why Dharmic sleep hygiene isn't about rules or routines. It's about relationship. how you relate to the moment before rest, how you treat your thoughts before dreams, how you care for your mind before it turns inward. Most people treat sleep like a shutdown. They run until they collapse. But the Buddhist view sees it as a return, a letting go, a way to release the layers of the day with intention so that the unconscious mind can rest freely. It's not just physical recovery, it's mental purification. Sleep becomes a spiritual act when approached with awareness. Buddhist monks, before closing their eyes, often reflect on impermanence, not as a dark thought, but as a way to release grasping, to let go of what can't be controlled. They don't carry the weight of the day into their dreams. They lay it down, gently, mindfully, one thought at a time. This isn't just for monks. It's for anyone who wants to wake up lighter. To prepare the mind for sleep in a dharmic way, you begin by meeting the end of the day with reverence, not drama, not mental loops, but gratitude. Review the day with softness, noticing what happened without judgment. Let it all pass through like a stream without clinging. This is known as daily recollection, a practice that clears the residue of thought. The point is not to analyze, but to release, to recognize the passing nature of everything: success, frustration, laughter, mistakes. It all moves. You don't need to carry it. This simple reflection brings peace to the nervous system. It lowers mental resistance. Your body begins to understand. The day is done. I can let go now. Without this kind of release, the subconscious holds on to unresolved energy, and that shows up as restlessness, tension, bad sleep, and foggy mornings. But when you meet your own experience at the end of the day with compassion and clarity, sleep becomes a practice of surrender. Another important element is reducing stimulation before sleep. This is more than just advice about turning off your phone. In Buddhist psychology, the senses are gateways. Every sight, sound, and thought leaves an imprint. So if the last thing you take in before bed is noise, comparison, or distraction, your mind continues to process that energy even after your body rests. But if you close the day with simplicity, gentle lighting, quiet spaces, calming sounds, you're telling the mind it's safe to release. Chanting or reciting mantras can also help dissolve mental tension. In many Buddhist traditions, reciting sacred syllables before sleep acts as a cleansing. It's like brushing the mind. The repetition calms the breath, slows the heart, and guides awareness into deeper states. But more importantly, it replaces mental clutter with meaningful sound. That sound becomes your final imprint for the night. Not worry, not screens, not thoughts that spiral, but intention, energy that vibrates with peace. The body follows the mind. So, when your mental state softens before sleep, your physical system responds. Cortisol drops, blood pressure steadies. You begin to drift naturally, without struggle, without needing to force anything. This kind of sleep enters deeper cycles more easily. And when you sleep deeply, you don't just rest, you heal. Buddhist monks also often reflect on the precepts before sleep, not as rules, but as reminders. Did I act with kindness today? Was I honest? Did I speak from love? This gentle review isn't about guilt, it's about alignment. By noticing where your actions did or didn't match your values, you recalibrate. You return to center. and you enter sleep more aligned with your intention to live well. This process cleans the karma of the day. In Buddhist thought, karma isn't about reward or punishment. It's about patterns, habits, energy. When you sleep with unresolved thoughts or unprocessed emotions, those patterns continue unconsciously. But when you acknowledge them with presence, you interrupt the cycle. You give your mind the signal. I saw it. I learned. I let it go. This is karmic hygiene. Mental clearing that allows your next day to start fresh. Another powerful practice is the cultivation of metta, loving kindness, before sleep. As you lie down, instead of cycling through mental noise, you direct gentle phrases of goodwill toward yourself and others. May I be safe. May I be at peace. May all beings rest with ease. These words, repeated slowly, anchor the heart in compassion. They replace self-criticism with care. They dissolve loneliness, and they create a field of safety within, which supports deeper rest. Many who do this regularly notice that their dreams shift. The subconscious begins to reflect the energy of the heart, not the stress of the day. And over time, this creates a deeper connection between waking and dreaming life. You no longer divide your spiritual practice from your sleep. They become one, a continuous flow of awareness, even in rest. Posture matters too, not in a rigid way, but as a way of respecting the body's transition. The Buddha himself instructed monks to lie on their right side, with mindfulness, like a lion in repose. Not slumped, not tense, but balanced, relaxed, yet awake. This posture isn't mandatory, but the principle behind it is powerful. You don't collapse into sleep. You enter it consciously. You choose how to rest, just as you choose how to wake. Buddhism also recognizes sleep as a preparation for death, not in a morbid way, but as a practice of surrender. Each night, you let go of identity. You release control. You dissolve into the unknown. And by practicing this with awareness, you reduce fear, not just of sleep, but of impermanence itself. You become familiar with letting go. You stop clinging. You learn to trust what comes after. This view makes sleep sacred. It's no longer something to escape into or pass through unconsciously. It's a ritual, a training, a part of your path. And the more you honor it, the more rested, grounded, and awake you feel, not just in the morning, but all the time. The modern world trains us to maximize every second, but in Buddhism, depth is valued over speed. So a dharmic night isn't about efficiency, it's about meaning. Even simple gestures, a slow breath, a quiet mantra, a single moment of gratitude can turn your night into practice. You're not rushing to bed to escape the day. You're walking into rest with reverence. And when you do this consistently, something changes. You begin to look forward to sleep, not as shutdown, but as sanctuary. Your room becomes a temple. Your bed becomes an altar. Your breath becomes prayer. And when you rise, you carry that peace with you, because it's not a new peace, it's the one you fell asleep with. This rhythm, built night after night, begins to reshape your whole life. Your mornings become lighter, your focus becomes clearer, your reactions soften. And it's not because you're trying harder, it's because you're resting better, not just physically, but spiritually. Your system gets used to stillness. And in that stillness, wisdom grows. Most importantly, you begin to remember that peace is always available, even at the end of a long day, even when the mind is tired, even when nothing is resolved. The breath is still there, the awareness is still there, the silence is still there. And in those final moments before you sleep, you can choose to return to that space. This is the path of conscious rest, of sacred transition, of sleep not as escape, but as spiritual return. And just like that, the cycle continues. How you fall asleep shapes how you rise, and how you rise shapes how you live. So when you close your eyes tonight, remember, you're not just ending your day. You're preparing to wake up grounded, calm, and clear. You're stepping into stillness with intention. And the breath will meet you there, waiting. And when the night has held you, when the breath has settled and rest has done its quiet work, a new kind of stillness arrives. Not sleep, not thought. A space before motion. A soft, alert awareness. The body begins to stir. The eyes may not be open yet, but the mind is returning. This is a sacred point, one that passes quickly. Most people miss it. They move too fast. They forget they are waking. But for the one who's watching, this is a moment of power, a space where intention can shape the day before the day shapes you. In Buddhism, that first thought carries weight. The direction of your mind, even in the first seconds after sleep, sets a pattern. And if there's one practice that transforms that brief, quiet moment into something deeply meaningful, it's this: silently grounding yourself in a vow. Not a task, not a goal, a vow, a commitment rooted in your deepest values. And no vow carries more clarity, more courage, or more compassion than the Bodhisattva vow. The Bodhisattva is not someone who seeks peace only for themselves. A Bodhisattva wakes for the benefit of all. Even before rising, even before speaking, they dedicate their life again. In silence, in stillness, they anchor themselves to their purpose, to live awake, to relieve suffering, to grow in wisdom, to walk the path for others as well as themselves. And this vow is not a ceremony. It is not recited with ritual robes or grand declarations. It is often whispered silently in the heart at the edge of dawn, where it matters most, at the point where the mind is still soft and the day has not yet been touched by ego or noise. This vow has many forms across traditions. It can be traditional or personal, structured or simple, but the energy is always the same, a deep remembering. I do not wake just for myself. I wake to serve. I wake to see clearly. I wake to live with love. And when this vow is repeated, something stirs in the body that is different from routine. Not a rush of motivation, not adrenaline. It's quieter than that, more grounded, a kind of inner alignment, a return to your center before anything else pulls you away. This isn't about spiritual performance. You're not trying to be noble. You're simply choosing not to wake up in a vacuum. You're reminding yourself of what matters, before emails, before opinions, before roles. This one vow, spoken without sound, reshapes how you enter your day. It breaks the trance of self-focus. It dissolves the default habits of mental noise. It invites the heart to lead, even before the feet touch the ground. Most people wake and immediately reach for their phone, for their identity, for their problems. But the bodhisattva begins by pausing. Before doing anything else, they remember why they rise. Not because the world demands it, but because they've chosen to meet the day with care, with clarity, with service. That shift, subtle as it may seem, has enormous power. Modern psychology tells us that the first thoughts of the day influence the emotional baseline for hours. A negative inner script can ripple into tension, reactivity, and disconnection. But a vow, a true, heartfelt vow, plants something else entirely. It seeds the mind with purpose. It activates neural circuits linked to compassion and agency. It sets a tone that is harder for fear to interrupt. Repeating the bodhisattva vow doesn't take time. It takes sincerity. Even a single sentence repeated slowly, with presence, becomes a powerful act. May I be of benefit. May I meet this day with an open heart. May I walk the path with integrity. These are not just words, they are intentions that hold the mind steady when life becomes fast. And life will become fast. That's why the vow must come first. It's not about solving the world's problems before breakfast. It's about planting the direction of your attention. The vow serves as a compass, and when the mind inevitably wanders, you return to it. Not because you're failing, but because returning is the path. That gentle redirection, again and again, is what builds the mental strength Buddhism honors. Strength without tension, discipline without force, compassion without collapse. This vow also helps dissolve the illusion of separation. Waking up is usually seen as a personal event, but the bodhisattva sees their waking as interconnected. Their presence, their energy, their choices ripple outward. Whether through speech, action, or silence, they influence. And so they choose to influence with care. That awareness softens the ego. It creates space around the self. And in that space, there's room for others, for love, for patience, for real connection. Repeating the vow doesn't just help you be a better person. It also helps you remember that you are already enough. You're not taking the vow to fix yourself. You're taking it because underneath the clutter, there's a clarity that wants to rise, and the vow clears the way. It silences the voices that say, you must be perfect or prove yourself. It invites you to wake up with trust, not just in the teachings, but in your own capacity to grow and serve. This practice becomes especially important on hard days, when you don't feel motivated, when life feels heavy. The vow doesn't ask you to feel good. It asks you to return anyway, even when tired, even when lost. That consistency becomes strength, a quiet, unwavering resilience that says, even now I walk the path, even now I serve. And that service doesn't have to be dramatic. Often it's invisible. Listening fully to a friend, letting go of a small resentment, taking a breath before reacting. These things may seem small, but when rooted in vow, they become sacred, because they come from intention, not impulse. They arise from depth, not habit. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a field. What you plant grows. The vow, repeated daily, is a seed that grows into character, into clarity, into wisdom that isn't shaken by praise or blame. It becomes part of you. And with enough repetition, you may not even need to speak it. It becomes a presence, a quiet current under everything you do. This is what it means to wake up with intention, not with pressure, not with urgency, but with grounded purpose. The Bodhisattva vow reminds you that your life is part of something larger, that your breath has meaning, that your actions carry weight, not because the world watches, but because you do. And when you begin the day this way, softly, inwardly, with heart, you carry something different into the world. You don't have to force kindness. You don't have to pretend to be calm. These qualities arise more naturally because you remembered your direction first. You touched the vow before the phone. You anchored the mind before it floated. Over time, this practice deepens. The vow is no longer something you recite. It becomes how you see, how you walk. You begin to notice suffering where you hadn't before, not in a way that drowns you, but in a way that wakes you up. You respond with more honesty, more gentleness, because the vow has trained your heart to open instead of tighten. There is a strength in this, not a loud strength, but an unshakable one, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that keeps showing up, no matter what. And this strength is exactly what the world needs more of, not in grand gestures, but in small, steady awakenings, in people who remember their vow in the quiet of the morning and live it in the noise of the day. This is not a concept. It's a lived path, and the starting point is always here, always now. No special setting, no ideal timing, just you, waking, just your breath, steady, just your heart, repeating what it knows. May I live awake, may I be of benefit, may this day be walked with awareness. That's all. That's enough. The vow doesn't ask for more than what you already have. It asks for sincerity, for return, for presence. And the more you give it, the more it gives back. And then, one morning, without even thinking, you'll wake up and feel it rise before you speak it. You'll feel that sense of purpose, like a steady flame, and you'll know you're not walking alone. You're part of something vast, something ancient, something alive. And that is how you begin. And when you begin the day with a vow, when the silence between sleep and movement is filled with meaning instead of noise, something inside settles. You don't just wake up, you rise into alignment. But even with intention, the mind is still tender in those early moments. It's quiet, yes, but also vulnerable. The space is open, and what you let in first matters deeply. Before the momentum of the day begins, before the thoughts take over, there is a fragile calm waiting to be shaped. And few things shape it more powerfully than sound. Not just any sound, sacred sound, not music meant to entertain, but vibrations meant to guide. Mantras, ancient and intentional, don't speak to your thinking mind. They reach something beneath thought. They speak to your nervous system, your energy body, your unconscious mind. And when used in the early hours of the morning, when the brain is still in its natural theta and alpha rhythm, these sacred vibrations don't just sound different. They do something different. In Buddhist and Vedic traditions, the power of mantra is never about meaning alone. It's about vibration. The repetition of sound is not just for the ear, it's for the entire body. It grounds the heart, slows the mind, and syncs your internal rhythms with something ancient, something steady. These sounds act as tuning forks, bringing scattered thoughts into harmony, aligning scattered energy into coherence. The morning mind is open. Mantra enters that openness not as noise, but as nourishment. Scientific research confirms what monastics have practiced for centuries. Brainwave studies show that chanting specific syllables, such as Om, Hum, So Hum, and others, reduces activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thinking. That's the loop most people wake into. Thoughts about identity, pressure, problems, planning. Sacred sounds break that loop. They don't fight the mind, they redirect it. You're not suppressing anything. You're offering the mind a more stable rhythm to follow. Sound travels through the body more than through the air. When you chant, even silently, the vibration moves through your chest, your throat, your bones. It becomes a full-body experience. That's why mantra in the morning is more than spiritual poetry. It's energetic architecture. It builds the foundation of your state. It carves space in the nervous system for stillness, clarity, and focus. This is especially potent when the mind is still hovering near sleep. That theta-alpha window is a natural meditative state. You don't have to force it. You're already there. And because the barrier between conscious and unconscious is thin during this time, what you repeat, out loud or within, goes deeper. It doesn't just echo in your ears, it leaves an imprint on your emotional baseline. You begin to feel the resonance long after the sound fades. Mantra doesn't require belief. It requires sincerity. You don't have to analyze each syllable. You just have to show up. Repeat. Feel. Let the body respond. Because the body remembers what the mind forgets. The body responds to rhythm, to tone, to resonance. This is not conceptual, it's felt. Mantras work because they bypass mental resistance. They allow you to participate in peace before the mind can argue with it. This practice becomes a way of claiming the energy of your morning. Instead of absorbing the first inputs of stress from screens, headlines, or mental chatter, you begin by setting your own internal frequency. You become the source. You fill your space with vibration that supports your intention rather than distracts from it. This isn't about avoiding the world. It's about preparing your system to meet the world with presence and strength. There are different ways to work with sacred sound in the morning. Some chant aloud, letting the vibration travel clearly through the vocal cords. Others chant internally, feeling the sound without external volume. Both are effective. The key is attention. The repetition isn't mechanical, it's mindful. Each repetition is a return, a reset, a recalibration. Some mantras are simple seed sounds. Bija mantras like Om, Ram, or Hum each carry unique energetic qualities. Om expands, Ram activates, Hum purifies. These aren't just labels. Over centuries, practitioners have discovered their effects through direct experience. These syllables are refined tools, each one tuned to influence different layers of consciousness. You can explore these one at a time, not as a performance, but as inquiry. What does this sound do in my body? What happens to my breath, my mood, my posture? There are also longer mantras drawn from Buddhist sutras and tantric texts designed to invoke specific states. The Avalokiteshvara mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, evokes compassion. The medicine Buddha mantra calls in healing. The Tara mantra supports courage and swift action. These aren't recited for someone else's approval. They're a form of devotion, not to an external god, but to the qualities you want to cultivate within. What matters most is repetition. Not to impress, not to achieve, but to entrain the system. The more the body hears these sounds, the more easily it returns to calm. The more the heart recognizes their rhythm, the more naturally it opens. These sounds begin to live inside you. They become inner companions. You can call on them throughout the day. In stress, in fear, in confusion, they're there, not just as memory, but as living presence. This consistency is what turns mantra into transformation. A single chant might calm the mind temporarily, but daily practice creates a shift in identity. You begin to feel different, not just during the sound, but beyond it. Your tone of voice softens, your thinking slows, your reactions become more measured. You don't need to try so hard to be present, because your baseline has shifted closer to presence already. Sound also has a way of bringing the body and mind into the same room. Most people live in fragments. The body moves, the mind races, the emotions swirl separately. But sound integrates. It unifies. The breath, the pulse, the attention all come together around one vibration. That unity becomes the gateway to wholeness. And wholeness is not a luxury, it's a foundation, especially in the morning when your system is determining how it will function all day. There is also a relationship between sacred sound and energy flow. In yogic and Buddhist systems, the subtle body contains channels, nadis, meridians, through which energy moves. Sound, especially when repeated with intention, helps clear and activate these pathways. Chanting is not just mental, it's energetic hygiene. It clears stagnation, it moves blocked emotions, it strengthens your field. Some practitioners use mala beads in the morning to track repetitions, not as a scorecard, but as a tactile support for focus. 1 bead per repetition. A full mala of 108 chants becomes a cycle of purification. A moving meditation. Others prefer open-ended repetition, letting the sound continue until the system feels complete. There's no right way, only honest way. The point is not how many times you chant. The point is how deeply you meet the sound. It's also helpful to pay attention to what precedes the mantra. Before sound, silence. That silence is part of the practice. You begin with quiet, not emptiness, but expectancy. The silence is alive. It prepares the body to receive. When the mantra enters, it lands deeper. And when it finishes, the silence that follows is not the same. It is fuller. It vibrates with what was just spoken. This rhythm, silence, sound, silence, becomes a language. One that doesn't need concepts. It's a conversation between your deeper self and the field of life. You are not just preparing to live your day, you are participating in shaping it. This kind of start becomes a form of spiritual protection. You're not closing off the world. You're tuning your instrument before stepping into the orchestra. You're making sure your energy is aligned before it meets external forces. And that alignment changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Emotions become more spacious. Even challenges lose some of their grip, because you began in coherence, and coherence is what the world rarely gives you. It gives speed, distraction, urgency. Mantra gives rhythm, repetition, ground. You don't need to escape the world to stay centered. You just need to return to sound, again and again. This is not a discipline of control. It's a discipline of devotion. You come to the sound not to master it, but to be shaped by it. You listen as much as you chant. You feel more than you think. The mantra doesn't need to change you. It reveals what's already steady inside you, what's already awake. That revelation, over time, becomes unmistakable. You'll notice your mornings have more space. Your thoughts feel less sticky. Your body feels more available to the day. And when stress arises, you don't fight it. You return. Back to the breath, back to the body, back to the sound. This is what sacred sound does. It doesn't add to your life. It clears space within it. It doesn't impose a new identity. It dissolves what's in the way of your natural peace. And the morning is the perfect place for that to begin. Because when you start from stillness, when you meet the day with vibration instead of noise, you carry something different into every hour that follows. You don't have to force presence. It's already here, vibrating just beneath the surface. You just need to listen. And now, as the morning continues, you've not only returned to intention, you've returned to resonance, to the frequency of your own clarity. And that frequency is the ground you'll walk on all day. And when the sound fades, when the last echo of mantra settles into silence, something inside you is clearer. The nervous system feels less guarded. The breath moves with more space. The mind isn't racing forward, it's resting in the present. You've begun the day not just with calm, but with resonance. But this opening, this peaceful readiness, is not the final step. It's the doorway to something deeper. Because now the question becomes, what do you plant into this open space? What emotions? What thoughts? What direction does the heart take next? In Buddhist practice, there are 4 qualities known not just for their ethical beauty, but for their transformative power. The 4 immeasurables. These are not simply virtues, they're tools. Inner forces that, when trained regularly, have the power to reshape emotional patterns, rewire the brain, and regulate how you respond to everything that follows. And there is no better time to engage them than first thing in the morning, when the mind is soft, neuroplasticity is naturally heightened, and attention is not yet hijacked by the day. These 4, compassion, loving kindness, empathetic joy, and equanimity, are considered limitless for a reason. They're not bound by preference or conditions. You don't direct them only at the people you like. You don't wait for them to arise naturally. You practice them deliberately. You cultivate them as inner skills, as emotional states that extend beyond mood. Each one opens a different part of the heart, and each one strengthens a different function in the brain. Together, they become a powerful morning training, one that doesn't just make you feel good, but changes how your nervous system responds to life. Compassion is the first. Not a feeling of pity or sadness, but the raw capacity to stay present with suffering without shutting down. In the early morning, when your thoughts are still forming their direction, sitting quietly and bringing to mind the suffering of others, not in a heavy way, but in a caring, spacious way, activates a specific part of the brain known as the insula. This is the area responsible for empathy and interconnection. When you hold someone else's pain in your awareness with care, without solving or judging, you are strengthening this circuitry. And in doing so, you're building resilience. Compassion doesn't make you softer in a fragile way. It makes you stronger in a connected way. The heart learns not to turn away. In the morning, reflecting on compassion rewires how you relate to challenge. Instead of defaulting to frustration or defense, you begin with availability. You carry this with you. A look from someone on the street, a tone in an email, a task that feels heavy. The default reaction is often to protect. But if compassion is already alive in your system, you stay open instead. You move from care, not from threat. And this shift changes everything. Loving kindness, or metta, is next. While compassion focuses on the wish to alleviate suffering, loving kindness focuses on the wish for well-being, for happiness, for safety. This too is practiced in the morning before emotions have hardened into reaction. And again, it is trained, not left to chance. You begin by offering simple phrases inwardly. May I be well. May I be peaceful. May I live with ease. Not to pretend, not to cover pain, but to set a tone, a baseline. Neuroscience shows that these kinds of thoughts activate positive emotion circuits in the prefrontal cortex. But more importantly, they create emotional safety. A sense that it's okay to soften, to open, to care. After directing these phrases toward yourself, you extend them outward, first to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then eventually to someone you struggle with, not to approve of them, but to free yourself. This practice doesn't remove conflict, it reduces the mind's habit of carrying it. You stop feeding the stories that close the heart. And over time, the brain rewires to expect connection instead of division. Loving kindness in the morning sets a very specific tone. It tells your body that you are safe enough to relax, that you don't have to armor yourself to meet the world, that the first movement of your mind is goodwill, not fear. And that small shift creates a domino effect. You're less reactive, less defensive. You listen more, you judge less. And it's not effortful. It's the result of the mind having been conditioned to lean toward care. Empathetic joy is the third. It may sound simple, but it's one of the most challenging and liberating practices. It's the conscious cultivation of happiness for others. Not envy, not comparison, but a genuine delight in someone else's well-being. This rewires the emotional brain away from scarcity. It undoes the deep pattern that says, their success means less for me. And in the morning, when the brain's story of self is just beginning to wake up, inserting this kind of joy before ego takes the wheel is deeply transformative. You think of someone you know who's thriving. You focus on their joy, their achievement, their health, and you repeat, not mechanically, but sincerely, may your happiness continue. May your joy grow. May you be free from suffering. This practice activates reward centers in the brain, just like receiving a gift yourself, but it does so without attachment. You become someone who celebrates naturally, who rejoices without needing to be the center. And this kind of emotional freedom is rare. Most people carry subtle resentment in their bodies. Even if they don't say it, it sits like static under the surface, a tension, a contraction. Joy practice dissolves that. It teaches the body to relax in the presence of other people's goodness. It frees up energy that was stuck in comparison. And it opens the heart wider than personal success ever could. Equanimity is the last of the four, but in many ways it holds them all together. It's the practice of balance, not numbness, but stable clarity. The willingness to hold both joy and sorrow without being pulled apart. And in the morning, when the mind tends to move toward extremes, worry about the future, regret from the past, equanimity acts as a stabilizer. It tells the system, everything will change, and I can meet it all. This isn't cold detachment. It's warm presence without clinging. You reflect on the truth that every person, including yourself, is responsible for their own actions, their own journey. You still care, you still help, but you release the illusion of control, and in doing so, you free your nervous system from unnecessary tension. The mind no longer grabs every emotion and makes it personal. It learns to stay wide, clear, grounded. Practicing equanimity, first thing in the morning, trains your attention not to chase what feels good or fight what feels bad. It helps you meet the day with steadiness. You're not trying to manipulate experience. You're letting experience come and go, and you're rooted in the middle. This mental posture creates emotional flexibility. You bend, but you don't break. You feel, but you're not consumed. This is inner strength at its most subtle. Each of the four immeasurables does something specific, but together they create a nervous system that knows how to stay open, how to stay kind, how to stay steady in a changing world. And when practiced in the morning, they become more than ideals. They become habits, neural patterns, emotional templates. The brain wires what it repeats, so if your first thoughts each day are thoughts of care, your entire system begins to operate from that frequency. This kind of practice also expands your identity. You're no longer just a person moving through tasks. You're a presence, a field of awareness that touches everything it meets with clarity and kindness. You stop looking at the day as something to get through. You begin to see it as something to serve with. Each interaction becomes a continuation of your morning training. Each challenge becomes a place to apply your practice. And over time, these qualities begin to arise even without prompting. You find yourself responding with compassion before you think about it. You feel joy for others without needing to try. You move through stress without losing balance. These are not personality traits. They are trained responses, and you trained them one morning at a time. The beauty of the four immeasurables is that they're always available. They don't require conditions. They don't depend on mood. They don't need rituals or tools. They need willingness, a few minutes of sincerity, a few breaths of attention, and the results echo far beyond the practice itself. They shape how you move through space, how you treat people, how you hold your own pain, and most of all, they change what you radiate into the world. Because even if no one sees your morning practice, they feel it, in your tone, in your presence, in your choices. This is how inner work becomes outer impact, not through force, but through quiet consistency. And so, as you continue forward, you do so from a place that is not just calm, but cultivated. You've not only opened your day with care, you've trained the qualities that carry you through it. And that kind of training is what makes the mind not just awake, but awake and wise. That's the strength of beginning your day with the 4 immeasurables. You're not just preparing for what's ahead, you're transforming the kind of person who's meeting it. And once the heart has been trained toward care, once the emotional center is softened and open from the 4 immeasurables, there's a different kind of clarity that begins to emerge. A clarity not just about how we feel, but how we move, how we act, how we shape the hours that lie ahead. Because even with compassion alive, even with presence felt, there's still one major challenge waiting quietly just beyond those first waking moments, the pull toward extremes. One part of you may want to rush, to achieve, to do everything perfectly. Another part might want to retreat, to avoid, to postpone the day entirely. This inner split is common. It's rarely spoken about, but it defines how many people begin their mornings, either in a state of silent pressure or subtle avoidance. And it is here that one of the most vital teachings in Buddhism becomes deeply relevant: the middle way. This isn't a vague idea about balance. It's a practical, trainable, lived approach that threads a path between overdrive and apathy, between harsh self-discipline and passive drifting, between chasing the perfect morning and giving up on one entirely. It was the very foundation of the Buddha's awakening. He had tried both extremes, extreme indulgence, then extreme renunciation, and found that neither led to peace. It was only through the middle way that he found liberation, and that same path can be applied each morning as a way to meet life with grounded energy. The modern world often starts the day in one of 2 ways. The first is urgency. Wake up fast, check messages, get ahead. The nervous system is instantly activated, filled with pressure, and this state is praised. Being productive early is seen as discipline. But when examined closely, this pattern doesn't bring clarity. It brings contraction. It's not rooted in intention, it's rooted in reaction. The body moves, but the mind is not present. You're not connected to life. You're escaping the discomfort of slowing down. The second extreme is disconnection. Hitting snooze repeatedly, feeling heavy, knowing the day is here but avoiding it. This isn't rest, it's resignation. The system isn't relaxing, it's collapsing. Often, this is mistaken for being soft with oneself, but in truth, it's a form of passive suffering. The energy is stuck, the mind is unclear, the heart is unsure, and the weight grows heavier the longer it lingers. The middle way offers a third option, one that honors the body's signals, respects the mind's complexity, and returns again and again to presence. It begins with noticing. Before choosing action or inaction, you watch. What does my body feel like right now? What thoughts are present? What's the energy that's guiding me? You don't analyze, you don't fix, you just listen. This awareness is the first step out of rigidity. Rigidity, whether hard or soft, is the real issue. In overdrive, there's tightness, a need to control. In apathy, there's numbness, a refusal to engage. Both are closed systems. Both resist life. The middle way stays responsive. You learn to meet the energy of the moment without collapsing into it or trying to conquer it. This creates space. Space for choice. Space for subtle action. Space for intention to move the body gently forward. One of the practices that supports this is checking your internal posture, not just how you're sitting or standing, but how you're approaching the moment. Is there tension in the jaw? Are you holding the breath? Is your mind speeding ahead? These small signs reveal whether you're leaning toward over-effort or under-engagement. From there, you return. You soften what's tight. You enliven what's dull. You don't force balance. You remember it. In the early morning, your brain is not fully locked into habitual patterns yet. This is a window of pliability where new responses can be trained more easily. The middle way becomes not just a decision, but a nervous system state. You are teaching your body what easeful effort feels like, what presence with movement feels like, what it's like to begin the day without pushing or retreating. This also helps shape how goals are held. Instead of attaching to outcome, you bring attention to process. You still write the list. You still show up for the work. But you are not driven by fear or ego. You are moved by alignment. The difference is subtle but real. In one, the energy feels desperate. In the other, it feels anchored. The body can feel this difference even when the outside actions look the same. The middle way also removes the moral judgment from how the day starts. You stop labeling yourself as good when you're productive or bad when you're slow. These labels create inner tension and feed the very extremes the path tries to avoid. Instead, you learn to ask more honest questions. Was I present? Did I listen to what the moment needed? Did I act from connection or reaction? You begin to see that effort is not the enemy, and neither is rest. It's the quality behind each that matters. You can move quickly with mindfulness. You can rest deeply with alertness. There is no single correct pace. The key is flexibility, responsiveness, an inner fluidity that stays in touch with reality rather than some idea of how things should be. This kind of inner flexibility is supported by rituals that don't demand perfection. You can build a morning rhythm that has structure but also space. Maybe it includes breath work, or a short walk, or reading something that grounds you. These are not obligations, they are touchstones. You're not forcing the body to fit a shape. You're shaping the energy of the day with gentle consistency. And if the plan changes, that's part of the practice. The middle way teaches you to hold discipline without rigidity. Some mornings will flow, some won't. You don't fight this. You work with what's here. If the mind is foggy, you meet it with clarity. If the body is heavy, you meet it with compassion. But you still rise. You still show up. The effort may be smaller, but the sincerity remains. That's the path. This approach builds confidence, not from doing everything perfectly, but from knowing you can return. That returning is enough. That your identity is not tied to performance. It's tied to presence. And when presence is your foundation, both failure and success lose their grip. You stop clinging to outcomes. You begin to value awareness itself. The middle way also teaches you to respect energy cycles. Some days are high energy, others are not. But both are workable. You learn to lean into what's available, not to push beyond your limits, but also not to withdraw from growth. It's a relationship with effort that is nuanced, mature, and deeply sustainable. This sustainability is vital. Extremes burn you out. Rigidity creates rebellion. But when you learn how to start the day with this balanced engagement, your system trusts you. It knows it won't be forced. It also knows it won't be neglected. That trust allows you to build a morning rhythm that doesn't collapse under pressure. And perhaps most importantly, the middle way reconnects you with joy. Not excitement, not escape, but the quiet joy of being in harmony with your own nature. There's a kind of pleasure that arises when action flows from presence. It's not dramatic, but it's steady. A deep sense that you are aligned, even if the day ahead is uncertain. This joy becomes a quiet motivator. You no longer wake up chasing something or avoiding something. You wake up returning to something. Yourself. Not as a fixed identity, but as a presence capable of meeting each moment honestly. You are not the same every morning. And that's exactly why the middle way is so powerful. It adjusts. It meets you where you are and walks forward with you. That walk becomes a path. Not toward perfection, but toward integration. You are no longer split between extremes. You're no longer lost in the noise of overdoing or the fog of underliving. You found a center. And from that center, you live. This is how Buddhist practice enters the body, enters the schedule, enters the way we meet the world, not as a rule, not as a weight, but as a way of returning again and again to what is steady, clear, and alive, a way of waking not in reaction, but in relationship. And when that relationship deepens, morning by morning, you no longer ask how to be productive or how to rest. You ask how to be present, how to move with kindness, how to meet the day in a way that does not drain you, but restores you. This is the middle way, not as a concept, but as a lived path. One step, one breath, one morning at a time. And when you've stepped into the morning without resistance, when you've chosen not to force yourself through it nor withdraw from it, something deeper becomes possible. With neither extreme pulling you out of alignment, a new kind of space opens up. Quiet, direct, and intimate. You're not rushing. You're not stuck. You're simply here. And in that stillness, you begin to sense something true. This day has never happened before, and it will never happen again. That truth, so simple, so easy to overlook, is the seed of one of the most powerful practices in Buddhist thought, death contemplation. Not as fear, not as sadness, but as a doorway, a way to see clearly, to feel deeply, and to live with urgency that isn't frantic, but awake. Because when you meet the morning with the quiet awareness that life is not guaranteed, everything changes. Not into panic, but into presence. In traditional Buddhist teachings, death contemplation is not morbid or dark. It is liberating. It's meant to cut through illusion, not to create despair, but to destroy forgetfulness. And there may be no more potent time to do this than right after waking. Your mind is fresh. You have not yet numbed yourself with habit. You are still close to sleep, that near-death softness where identity temporarily dissolves. From that place, you can reflect. This breath is a gift. This body, still warm and moving, is not owed. It is temporary. It is mine only for now. When you bring this into your awareness at the start of the day, you don't become heavier, you become lighter. Because the things that usually weigh you down, small worries, imagined problems, habits of complaint, lose their power. You see through them. You remember that nothing here is permanent. No moment, no emotion, no mistake, no achievement. And that remembrance doesn't remove responsibility. It sharpens it. It tells you, while you're here, be here fully. Reflecting on death doesn't mean rejecting life. It means not postponing it. The mind, left unchecked, is always preparing to live later. Later, when everything is better. Later, when things are easier. But later is not real. Morning death contemplation cuts that pattern. It brings you back into your body, into your breath, into the beauty that is already present, but so often unseen. This practice is simple, but profound. As you wake, pause, feel your breath, feel your heartbeat. Acknowledge the truth. I am alive right now. I will not always be. Today could be my last. Not as a dramatization, but as a grounding. You don't have to believe it will happen. You just have to know that it could. That honest awareness, held for even 1 minute, reshapes how you value the time ahead. It becomes harder to take people for granted, harder to hold on to grudges, harder to walk through the day half awake, because the truth of impermanence humbles the ego. It softens the edges. It makes space for love where fear used to live. You begin to speak more directly. You listen more carefully. You move with care, not because you're fragile, but because you understand how precious this moment is. In Tibetan practice, practitioners are taught to remember death every day, not to be sad, but to be free. Free from delay, free from the illusion of endless time, free from clinging to what doesn't matter. This memory is not heavy when held properly. It is light. It opens the heart, sharpens the mind, and creates the energy to live in alignment with what truly matters. This also builds courage. Often, fear is rooted in illusion, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not having enough. But when you deeply accept that all things pass, including you, the grip of those fears begins to dissolve. You realize you don't have to wait to live courageously. You don't need a guarantee to act from the heart. Because what is there to lose, really, when everything is already in motion, already changing, already on its way? This kind of reflection invites simplicity. When you sit with the fact that this could be your last sunrise, many of the complications in your mind fall away. You don't need to fix every problem before you smile. You don't need to prove yourself before you feel peace. You begin to prioritize what nourishes the soul, what connects you to others, what feels real. And often, it's not the big things, it's presence, it's honesty, it's not wasting time trying to be someone you're not. And because this practice is done in the quiet of dawn, it doesn't require words. You don't need to say anything out loud. You simply sit with the awareness. You might repeat silently, "This life is temporary. May I live it well. This breath is a gift. May I meet it fully." These reminders are not affirmations. They are truths, and the body knows the difference. The nervous system softens. The thoughts slow down. The distractions lose their urgency. There is also deep gratitude woven into this practice. Not forced gratitude, but natural gratitude. The kind that arises when you realize that opening your eyes is not small, that walking to the kitchen is not guaranteed, that having the chance to greet someone you love is not something to postpone. Gratitude that comes from this kind of contemplation isn't conceptual, it is visceral, it is in your bones. It touches how you move through space, how you touch objects, how you greet people. Everything becomes more intimate. And you don't have to think about death in dramatic ways. You don't have to picture anything. You just need to hold the awareness that change is real, that nothing is held forever. Even the emotions you feel now will pass. That's why you don't need to escape them. You just need to stay with them until they shift, which they always will. Death contemplation, in this way, is not just about mortality. It's about movement, about remembering that life flows, and your job is to be present inside that flow. This also makes you more forgiving, not only of others, but of yourself. When you hold the reality that one day you won't be here, it becomes harder to criticize yourself for every flaw. You stop demanding perfection from a being that is always changing. You begin to see your own humanity with kindness. You understand that growth matters, but it doesn't require self-punishment. That compassion and impermanence are not opposites, they are companions. In traditional monastic settings, monks reflect each morning not only on the reality of death, but on the opportunity of life. The two are never separate, because knowing that something ends is exactly what makes it beautiful. This understanding refines your decisions. You stop wasting energy on resentment. You stop trading your attention for distraction. You begin to value direct experience over stories about experience. And the more you practice this, the more you begin to see death not as the opposite of life, but as its partner. As the force that gives meaning to every word, every gesture, every quiet cup of tea. You stop needing dramatic moments to feel alive. You begin to find depth in the ordinary. Because every ordinary moment is, in truth, rare. There will never be another version of this morning. Not with this sky, not with this breath, not with this version of you. That kind of seeing changes what you carry. You let go more easily. You speak with more care. You stop needing to rush, because you are no longer afraid of being behind. You know that life is not about arrival. It's about presence. And presence is only possible when you are not hypnotized by the illusion of endless time. This awareness also supports service. When you know your time is limited, you begin to ask better questions. How can I help? What can I give today rather than just take? You stop measuring your value by what you gain. You begin to measure it by how deeply you show up. This isn't about doing more, it's about being more real. When you're aware of death, your values sharpen, and you align more naturally with them. You also become more patient. Because what's the rush, really? When you see the impermanence of all things, you stop demanding that they move faster. You allow them to unfold. You stop shouting at the river and start walking beside it. You don't lose your energy in things you can't control. You preserve it for the places where your presence can actually make a difference. And this preservation becomes a kind of quiet strength, a maturity. You stop being pulled around by every thought or mood. You're not pretending life is easy. You're simply not surprised when it's hard. And because of that, you meet it differently. Not braced, not panicked, but steady, clear, alive. This steadiness is what gives rise to joy. Not surface happiness, but the deep joy that comes from being connected to the truth, You're not distracting yourself from what's hard. You're not waiting for everything to be perfect. You're living now, fully, without clinging, without delay. This is the gift of death contemplation. And when practiced each morning, even for a few quiet breaths, it transforms the way you meet the world. You don't need to change everything. You just need to see clearly. And from that clarity, love becomes easier. Forgiveness becomes natural. Courage becomes your baseline. Not because life is certain, but because it isn't. And you are awake for it, completely. And once you've met the morning with the quiet strength of death awareness, once you've felt the freedom that comes from letting go of illusions of permanence, something awakens beneath the stillness. It's not fear. It's not tension. It's something deeper, more raw. A call. A pressure that doesn't shout but burns quietly. A sense that time is moving, that life is asking for more, not in volume, but in depth. It's not restlessness. It's not anxiety. It's something older, a kind of sacred urgency. In Buddhist teachings, this feeling has a name, samvega. It's a word that doesn't fully translate, but carries the weight of realization. Samvega is what arises when you deeply see the fragility of life and the futility of wasting it. It's what you feel when comfort no longer satisfies, when routine no longer explains your longing, when the ordinary becomes too quiet for your inner hunger. Samvega is the shock of waking up, not to panic, but to purpose, a purpose that refuses to be dulled by distraction or fear. Unlike modern ideas of motivation, samvega doesn't come from comparison or pressure. It comes from insight, from seeing clearly that the clock is ticking, that comfort is seductive but hollow, and that no external success can answer the deepest questions of the heart. And yet, in its truest form, samvega is not despair. It's not depression. It's the fire that burns away illusion, the energy that gets born when you stop pretending you'll live forever and start asking what matters most. This feeling, especially when met in the morning, is transformative, because the first few hours of the day are a turning point. It's where you either fall back into the same loops or choose to walk a new path, even if that path starts with one quiet decision. Samvega invites you not to wait, not to collapse into passivity, and not to waste energy on guilt. It offers an alternative, to feel the urgency to grow and to hold that urgency with clarity instead of panic. In practice, this means beginning the day by reconnecting to your deepest intention, not the intention to be more productive or more liked, but the intention to live in alignment. You pause before your first action. You reflect, what am I doing with this life? Not as a burden, but as an inquiry. What do I keep putting off that actually matters? What truth have I been avoiding under the excuse of being too busy, too tired, too distracted? These are not questions that require immediate answers. They're meant to sharpen your awareness, to open your attention wider than the to-do list. Because once you reconnect to purpose in this way, action becomes easier, not because you've added pressure, but because you've removed doubt. Doubt that this moment matters. Doubt that your life is asking for anything beyond distraction. Samvega replaces that numbness with focus, with fire. But it's a grounded fire. That's what makes it different. It doesn't consume. It fuels. When rooted in mindfulness, samvega doesn't lead to overwhelm. It leads to precision. You stop scattering your energy. You begin to see where you're leaking time, where you're avoiding discomfort, where you're choosing easy over true. And instead of judging yourself, you return, you act, one clear step at a time. This feeling also purifies desire. It brings you back to a place where you want less of what doesn't matter and more of what brings you alive. You no longer chase success as a mask for worth. You no longer crave approval as proof you're enough. Samvega strips those illusions. It leaves you with the truth that what you are craving is depth, presence, real connection, and it gives you the strength to go after that without apology. One of the most misunderstood things about urgency is that it's often seen as stress. But Samvega shows that urgency and peace can coexist, that it's possible to feel a fire in the belly and still move with grace, that the pressure to grow doesn't need to become self-punishment. It can become sacred fuel. It can move your feet when the ego wants to sleep in. It can hold you accountable, not because you're broken, but because you're awake. Morning is the perfect time to feel this. Before the roles take over, before the routines harden, you meet the mirror of your own mind. You see the places where you've been delaying truth, where you've been compromising your own values out of habit. Samvega doesn't let you stay comfortable in that. It pokes at you, not to make you anxious, but to make you honest. And that honesty creates space for transformation. This also reframes how you view failure. When you act from ego, failure feels like a verdict. When you act from samvega, failure is just feedback, a reminder to recalibrate, to recommit. Because the commitment is not to winning, it's to waking up, to not wasting what cannot be saved: time, attention, love. Samvega teaches you to treat those things as sacred currency. You stop spending them on what numbs. You invest them in what frees. This practice doesn't require long hours or dramatic change. It requires remembering, returning, sitting with the energy that says, now, not later, not after more proof, now. It invites you to let urgency live in the body without turning it into tension, to feel that energy rise and channel it into action, not anxiety. And that's where mindfulness becomes essential. Without mindfulness, samvega can easily tip into burnout. You can confuse the call to grow with a need to push. But when you stay grounded in awareness, the energy sharpens instead of explodes. You act from clarity, you speak from truth, you work from alignment, and you rest without guilt, because rest is part of the path, not a pause from it. Samvega also transforms how you use time. Minutes stop being disposable. Even small moments matter. You stop waiting for the perfect opportunity. You begin where you are. That might mean making a phone call you've avoided, saying something you've been holding in, changing a pattern you've tolerated for too long. The action is small, the energy behind it is not. Because when urgency is connected to presence, everything you do carries weight. And over time, this becomes a way of life. You no longer need motivation to act. You're not waiting for inspiration. You're moved by something deeper. A sense that your life is not a rehearsal, that what you do today and how you do it is your legacy. Samvega wakes you up not just to death, but to meaning, to beauty, to the rare opportunity of being here. This energy can also be shared. When others feel lost, confused, stuck, your presence becomes a mirror. Not by lecturing or fixing, but by being someone who lives with urgency without panic, who moves with care but also commitment, who doesn't waste energy performing. People feel that. They feel the integrity. And sometimes just seeing that is enough to wake something up in them too. Samvega doesn't isolate you from the world. It connects you more deeply to it, but not through obligation, through resonance. You begin to see where your voice is needed, where your effort is useful, where your silence is powerful, because you're not chasing everything, you're listening for what's essential and responding to that. And because you are grounded in impermanence, you don't cling to results. You show up because showing up is the way you honor life. Not because it guarantees reward, but because it aligns with the truth. That truth becomes more important than comfort, more valuable than success, and more liberating than security. This is what transforms mornings. You're no longer negotiating with your own potential. You're living it, not perfectly, but fully. And that fullness, once touched, becomes something you no longer wish to delay. That is the power of Samvega, not loud, not frantic, but unshakable. A fire that stays lit through every challenge, because it was never about being easy. It was about being real. And in that reality, you no longer waste your life wondering what it could become. You begin. And once the fire of Samvega has been felt, once you've allowed the energy of truth to rise in your body without turning into panic, there's a moment that comes next, a softening. Not into laziness, but into simplicity. The desire to act is now awake. But not everything requires big effort. In fact, the most powerful shift that follows Samvega is learning to meet ordinary life with extraordinary attention. Because while urgency gives you the spark to begin, what sustains your path is not grand action. It's presence in the smallest things. This is where the practice of bare attention begins. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel special, but it's foundational. And in the early hours of the morning, it becomes the doorway into living with depth without needing constant inspiration. Bare attention is not about doing more. It's about doing the same things differently, with more clarity, more stillness, more truth. Zen and Vipassana teachings both point to the same insight. Everything you need is already here. You don't need a temple. You don't need silence. You don't even need free time. You need awareness, applied gently, fully, in this moment, and then the next. The place where this becomes clearest is not during meditation. It's during habit, routines, the things we do every day without thinking, waking up, brushing our teeth, making the bed, walking to the sink. These are the moments we rush through, but these are also the moments where the mind can learn stillness more powerfully than in any seated posture. Toothbrushing might seem like an unlikely place for insight. But that's the point. Enlightenment is not reserved for silence and incense. It shows up wherever you are willing to be fully present. When you stand at the sink in the morning, half asleep, the body is moving. The mind is already jumping ahead. But what happens when you pause and bring full awareness into that ordinary act? What happens when you feel the brush meet the teeth, the foam in your mouth, the rhythm of your arm, the temperature of the water, the smell of the toothpaste. It becomes a practice, not of performance, but of noticing. This is bare attention. It's not analysis. You're not naming things. You're not judging anything. You're simply seeing, feeling, being, without adding or removing. The breath is there. The body is there. You are there, fully. And for those few minutes, you're not elsewhere. You're not trying to be different. You're not trying to finish fast. You are just brushing your teeth and fully alive while doing it. This doesn't sound impressive, but it changes everything. Because the mind that learns how to be present while brushing teeth can be present during hard conversations, during work, during sadness, during joy. Presence is not a skill that turns on when you need it. It is built in the small spaces. It is strengthened through repetition. Vipassana teaches us to observe without clinging, without resistance, to see what's happening without trying to change it. This observation is direct. It doesn't filter through commentary, and that kind of seeing is rare. The mind is used to adding, commenting, planning. But when you train it to simply rest in experience, it starts to change. You begin to see that you can stay awake inside moments that once felt boring. And when boredom dissolves, what remains is something simple and sacred. Life as it is. Morning routines are powerful because they are repetitive, and repetition creates pathways in the brain. When you bring awareness into those routines, you're not wasting time. You're deepening those pathways. You're teaching the nervous system how to move with attention instead of reflex. You are retraining what the default mode is. The act of brushing your teeth becomes a meditation, but not because it changes, because you change how you meet it. And this trains the same qualities that formal practice does. Patience, non-reactivity, embodiment. Most importantly, consistency. Enlightenment is not a moment of magic. It is a long, steady returning to what is true. And brushing your teeth is a perfect training ground because it happens every day. And if you can meet that with presence, what else might you meet? Zen often teaches through direct experience, not through ideas, not through beliefs. The teaching is in the moment, the act, the now, and that teaching is available in your bathroom, in your kitchen, in your walk to the door. When you make your bed, do you feel the texture of the fabric? Do you notice the shift in posture as you bend, stretch, smooth the surface? Do you sense the quiet pride in tidying a space? Or are you already thinking about something else? This practice is not about slowing down artificially. It's not about doing everything in slow motion. It's about doing things at their natural pace, but with full attention. That attention, even for 30 seconds, begins to create stillness. Not the absence of movement, the absence of resistance. You're not fighting the moment, you're with it, and that gives rise to joy. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when the mind is no longer split, when the hands are moving and the awareness is moving with them. There's no past, no future, just presence, just this. And in that space, even the act of rinsing your mouth becomes part of the path. This practice also transforms how you see yourself. You stop identifying so much with your thoughts because you realize they're always coming and going. But awareness stays. You are not the one brushing your teeth while thinking 100 things. You are the one who sees, who notices, and from that place, your sense of self softens. You're no longer the character in a story. You're the field of attention that watches the story arise and pass. This is not detachment, it's intimacy. You're not withdrawing from life. You're entering it more fully, through the ordinary, through the exact things you usually ignore. And that shift changes your day. Because once you start the morning in this way, presence follows you, into your breakfast, into your steps, into your voice. And yes, you'll forget. The mind will wander. You'll rush. That's okay. Bare attention is not about staying perfect. It's about returning without judgment, again and again. Not because you should, but because you've tasted the difference. And that difference feels like home. Even when life gets busy, this practice doesn't disappear. It simplifies. You bring attention to your breath while washing your face. You feel your feet on the ground while walking to the kitchen. You notice the first sip of water as if it's the first sip ever. And this noticing rewires you. It teaches your mind to stay with what's real instead of chasing what's imagined. This attention also brings emotional awareness. Because when you slow down enough to feel the brush on your teeth, you also begin to feel what's in your heart. Are you anxious, heavy, tender? Bare attention includes this. You're not trying to fix your state. You're including it. You're saying, this is also part of this moment. And that inclusion brings peace. You are not at war with what you feel. You are simply here with all of it. Zen sometimes calls this just this. Whatever is happening, just this. Nothing extra. No need to layer meaning. No need to escape. When brushing, just brushing. When thinking, just thinking. When breathing, just breathing. This may sound simple. It is. But in that simplicity is the deepest wisdom. Because when you truly meet what is, you meet yourself. Not as an idea. As a living, breathing awareness, present in this ordinary, sacred act. So now, the morning is no longer divided. The spiritual and the mundane are the same. The brushing of teeth, the folding of clothes, the movement of breath, each one a doorway, each one a practice. Not because you made it special, but because you met it fully. And that meeting, again and again, is what shapes the day. Not effort, not performance. Attention, bare, open, honest. And from that honesty, life unfolds. And once you've brought full attention into the most ordinary parts of your morning, once you've felt presence settle into your hands as they move through quiet ritual, another question starts to surface, softly, almost behind the silence. If I can observe my movements so clearly, who exactly is observing? If I am not my thoughts, not my tasks, not even this body performing these familiar actions, then what am I? This is not a puzzle to be solved. It's an invitation. A moment to begin your day, not as the character you usually play, but as the awareness beneath all the roles. Before coffee, before conversation, before you pick up the thread of your life story again, there is a rare and valuable space. A moment before identity fully takes hold. A gap where the mind is not yet repeating all the usual definitions. And in that space, you can step into one of the most radical and liberating reflections in all of Buddhist thought, the contemplation of anatta, non-self. This is not a denial of your existence. It's not about disappearing or rejecting your life. It's about seeing through the illusion that there is a fixed, unchanging self behind everything you do. Because the truth is, the you who wakes up each morning is not the same as the one who went to sleep. The thoughts are different. The feelings shift. The body changes slightly, breath by breath. What stays constant is not the personality. What stays is the awareness of change. Anatta. Reflection begins not by thinking, but by observing. You wake up and you notice sensations, the feeling of the sheets, the temperature of the air, the mind beginning to move. But if you look closely, none of these experiences say I on their own. The thought arises, but where is the thinker? The body shifts, but where is the owner? What you find, if you really look, is movement without a controller. Life flowing without a central, separate self directing it. This insight doesn't lead to confusion. It leads to freedom, because most of the suffering we carry into the day comes from the belief in a solid self. A self that must be protected, improved, defended, and validated. When you start the morning by relaxing that belief, your emotional reactivity softens. You no longer have to defend a fixed image. You no longer feel attacked by every opinion or setback. You become less self-referential, more available to life as it is. This doesn't mean you lose your preferences or your memories. It means you stop identifying with them. You stop saying, "This is me," and start saying, "This is arising." That shift creates space. You can feel an emotion without being overwhelmed by it. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can face uncertainty without building a story around it. Because the ego needs stories to survive. Anatta sees through the need. In early morning practice, this reflection can be very simple. As you wake, pause. Notice each experience that arises. A thought, a breath, a feeling. And ask gently, who is this happening to? Is there a fixed self here, or just awareness watching experience unfold? You're not trying to answer intellectually. You're loosening the grip of assumption. The assumption that you are your name, your job, your history. Those things are real, but they are not the whole. They are parts. Temporary, changing parts. This doesn't create distance from life. It brings you closer. Because when you stop filtering everything through me, you see more clearly. You see others without comparing. You see beauty without needing to own it. You see pain without needing to make it about your identity. That's what makes this reflection so practical. It reduces self-centered thinking not through guilt, but through direct experience of what's actually happening. You might start by observing language. Notice how often the mind says my or I, my plan, my success, my mistake, my image. Then pause and ask, what is really mine here? What part of this is unchanging? What can I hold on to forever? Usually, the answer is nothing, and that's not bad news. It's the opening to peace, because if nothing is fixed, nothing needs to be perfect. If there is no solid self to protect, you don't need to react to every challenge as a personal threat. This reflection also brings a different kind of compassion. When you see that others are also acting from the illusion of a fixed self, you stop blaming them as deeply. You understand that their fear, their pride, their anger, these too are reactions built around protecting something fragile and imagined. You're no longer caught in the drama. You can respond from awareness, not reflex. Practicing this in the morning gives your day a lighter foundation. It removes the pressure to perform. You don't have to constantly prove you exist. You don't need constant validation. You start to feel a quiet stability, not based on your role, your appearance, or your achievements, but on something much deeper, the knowing itself, the bare presence that is always here, quietly observing all of it come and go. And when the mind forgets, which it will, the practice is simply to return. You don't need to be in a quiet room. You don't need to be still. You can reflect on anatta while brushing your teeth, while making tea, while putting on shoes. You simply pause and observe. Thought is arising. Sound is arising. This posture is being felt. But nowhere is there a solid, separate self. Just process, just experience, just unfolding. This kind of seeing is not cold or distant. It makes life feel more alive, more spacious. Because you stop needing to control everything. You stop needing every moment to serve your image. And that frees up energy, attention, love. You can be more present with others because you're not constantly measuring how they make you feel about yourself. You're not using every interaction as a mirror for your ego. This also changes how you relate to goals. You still work, you still grow, but you're not doing it to inflate an identity. You're doing it because the moment calls for it, because the work matters, not because it defines you. That makes action cleaner, lighter, more honest. You're not trying to become someone, you're expressing what's already unfolding. When challenges arise, the same insight applies. You can feel fear or sadness, but you don't have to claim it as yours. You can say, "Fear is present," instead of, "I am afraid." That small shift changes how the emotion is held. It doesn't mean you avoid your feelings. It means you stop being controlled by them. You allow them to pass through, knowing they are not the core of what you are. And the more you train in this reflection, the more your baseline shifts. You stop waking up trapped in a rigid story. You stop carrying yesterday's identity as if it's carved in stone. You begin to live with more curiosity, more openness, more peace. You still have a name, a body, a life, but they no longer define you. You can hold them lightly, use them wisely, and release them when it's time. This is what freedom looks like, not an escape from life, but a deeper intimacy with it. Not a disappearance of self, but a softening of the boundaries that keep you from seeing clearly. And as the morning continues, you carry that softness forward, into movement, into speech, into the next thing you do, not as a self trying to become more, but as awareness, simply showing up for what is. That is how you begin to wake, not just from sleep, but from the ego's dream, quietly, gently, fully. And once you begin to see through the ego's grip, once you stop mistaking the mind's story for your identity, there's a new kind of space that opens, not empty, not numb, a space that feels wide, clear, and quiet. Inside that quiet, the mind no longer feels like a battlefield. It feels like a doorway. Not a place to solve yourself, but a place to rest deeply. This is where something rare can arise, not more thinking, not more doing, but a level of stillness most people never touch because they're always chasing something outside. The deeper states of concentration, known in Buddhist training as jhana, become possible when nothing in you is trying to escape. In the early morning, Before the world pulls at your attention, the conditions for this deep inner absorption are uniquely supportive. The mind has not yet gathered its usual momentum. The body is relaxed from rest. The breath is slower. The thoughts are softer. It's not yet pulled into timelines, names, responsibilities. It is simply awake, but unclaimed. These are the perfect conditions for entering concentration that is not forced, but welcomed. Jhana, in the traditional Buddhist path, is not about zoning out. It is about tuning in so deeply that the mind becomes unified with the object of attention. There is no split, no background noise. The sense of division fades. You don't lose consciousness, you lose distraction. You become fully immersed in the moment until even the concept of you observing the breath begins to dissolve. Only breath, only presence, only absorption. These states are not mystical, they are natural, they are built into the nervous system. What makes them rare is not that they're unreachable, it's that modern life rarely allows the mind to be quiet long enough for them to emerge. But in the early morning, if you know how to enter, the doorway is open. And you don't have to be a monk or spend hours sitting. You have to cultivate the conditions: intention, stability, attention, and then let the mind settle into its own natural stillness. This begins with posture, not rigid, not collapsed, aligned, supported. When you sit with a stable spine, relaxed shoulders, and an open chest, you're sending the body a message. We are not in danger. We can go inward. You are removing unnecessary tension so that awareness is not trapped in physical discomfort. The body becomes a container, not a distraction. From there, the breath becomes your entry point, but not as a task, as a home. You don't manipulate it, you don't judge it, you feel it, you rest in it. One inhale, one exhale, over and over until the mind begins to settle. At first, it may wander. That's natural. But because it's early, because the thoughts are not yet fully active, returning to the breath feels easier. You're not swimming upstream. You're flowing into the natural current of awareness. This is where mindfulness becomes concentration. At first, the attention flickers. You notice a sound, a thought, a sensation. But each time, you return gently. You don't fight distraction. You dissolve it by not feeding it. The more you return, the more the returning becomes automatic. You don't have to think about staying. You're simply there, fully. And then the shift happens. The mind begins to stabilize. The breath becomes subtle. The sense of time fades. The boundary between observer and observed dissolves. This is the first level of absorption, not because something dramatic has occurred, but because something unnecessary has fallen away. You're no longer observing the breath from a distance. You are in it. You are it. And in that unity, the mind experiences a pleasure that is not sensory, but deep and internal. A joy that doesn't depend on external conditions. A peace that needs nothing added. That peace is the hallmark of jhana. Not excitement, not stimulation, but a quiet contentment that comes from being fully with what is. And this state has profound effects on the brain. Neuroscience shows that deep concentration increases activity in the prefrontal cortex while reducing activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thinking. In jhana, The mind is not planning, it's not remembering, it's resting, and in that rest, it begins to repair. Studies on long-term meditators show that these states change the structure of the brain. They increase gray matter density in areas related to emotional regulation, decision-making, and attention. But even without the science, the direct experience speaks for itself. You leave practice feeling lighter, clearer, less entangled in thought, more available to the world, not because you've withdrawn from it, but because you've returned to it from a place of wholeness. Training in early morning jhana doesn't mean forcing the mind into silence. It means setting the conditions and letting the mind sink, like sediment settling in a glass of water. The more you practice, the faster it settles, the deeper it rests. And over time, that depth becomes accessible even during the day. You carry the residue of absorption with you. Your baseline shifts. You become less reactive, more focused, more patient, because you've trained the mind to stay with what's real. There are stages in jhana, each with its own flavor, but the goal is not to map them or chase them. The goal is to rest in the quality of mind that's present and let it deepen naturally. The first level is access concentration, the moment when the mind stops wavering. Then come the deeper absorptions, marked by joy, tranquility, unity, and eventually equanimity. Each one builds on the last. But again, it's not a ladder. It's a process of letting go. And the morning supports this like no other time. Because before the mind is flooded with input, it is open. Before the nervous system is taxed, it is calm. Before the world makes its demands, you have a window, a rare window, and how you use it shapes everything that follows. Even 10 minutes of focused attention can shift the entire tone of the day. The breath is not the only object of entry. Some use visualizations, some focus on light, some anchor in sound. The point is not the object, it's the relationship to it. You choose one and you stay. You let it draw you in. You let everything else fall away. And in that falling away, the mind reveals its natural stillness, not created, not imagined, just uncovered. This kind of training also sharpens insight, because when the mind is deeply concentrated, it becomes clear enough to see the truth of impermanence, of unsatisfactoriness, of non-self, not as concepts, but as lived experience. You watch sensations arise and pass. You see thoughts dissolve without needing to push them. You realize that awareness doesn't need control to stay clear. It needs stillness, and jhana creates that stillness. And this changes your confidence, because you begin to know, not intellectually, but directly, that you can meet life from a deeper place, that you are not at the mercy of your thoughts, that your mind can be trained to rest, to absorb, to stabilize, not only in silence, but in the noise of the world. That's why morning jhana is not about escape. It's preparation. It's the grounding that lets you return to your life with presence, with clarity, with emotional stability that doesn't crack under pressure. You start the day not with noise, but with absorption, not with chaos, but with coherence. And over time, this becomes your natural rhythm. You wake, you sit, you drop in. You don't rush to begin the day. You begin within. And everything that follows flows from that stillness. That is the gift of early morning concentration, not something you chase, something you enter, quietly, deeply, completely. And when the mind has been given the space to drop into stillness, when you felt what it means to rest below thought rather than within it, something subtle starts to reveal itself. Even after concentration dissolves and the breath returns to its natural rhythm, you begin to notice the thoughts that arise next with a sharper clarity. They are quieter now, but not gone. They are the first whispers of cognition returning. And in that first movement of mind after stillness, a new kind of responsibility begins. Because what comes next, what you think, what you believe, what you let repeat, starts to shape your day in ways deeper than habit. It begins to shape your karma. Not karma as punishment, not as superstition, but as cause and effect. Thought becomes speech, speech becomes action, action becomes tendency, tendency becomes identity, identity becomes a life, and all of it begins with how the mind is used, especially in the first few moments of the day when it is most suggestible, most open, most capable of being trained in a direction that can either create suffering or set you free. This is where the Buddhist understanding of mental karma becomes practical. You don't have to believe in multiple lifetimes to see it. You just have to look closely at your own patterns. Wake up with anxious thinking every day, and eventually your nervous system learns anxiety as a default. Wake up with resentment or regret, and those grooves deepen, becoming emotional habits that echo through every part of your day. But the opposite is also true. Wake up with clarity, with patience, with compassion, and the mind begins to remember that pattern too. Thoughts are not just mental noise, they are energy, direction. They leave a trace, and the more often a thought is repeated, the more powerful that trace becomes. Neurons wire together, emotional responses get linked, and before long, it's not just a thought, it's a lens, a way you see the world, and what you see, you respond to. This is karma in motion. This is the mechanism that turns 5 seconds of unchecked thinking into 10 hours of emotional friction. But the mind can be trained, not all at once, not through control, but through awareness, through choosing which thoughts to feed and which to let pass, through recognizing that even the smallest mental habit is shaping the quality of your consciousness. Especially in the morning, when the brain is shifting from delta and theta waves into more alert states, every thought is like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples last longer. The direction is set more easily. The first step in transforming karmic thought patterns is noticing what arises without judgment. You're not trying to stop the mind, you're observing its shape. Do the first thoughts center around worry, planning, criticism? Do they latch onto identity, replaying old narratives? Or are they soft, curious, neutral? Before you engage with them, you name them: thinking, planning, regretting, fantasizing. You don't label yourself, you label the thought pattern. This creates distance, space, choice. With practice, you begin to see that many thoughts are simply momentum from yesterday. They are not fresh, they are residue. Habitual mental movements that arise only because you let them repeat without interruption. When you see this clearly, you can meet those patterns with gentleness, not resistance. You don't have to argue with them, you just stop believing they're necessary. That pause breaks the cycle. And with each pause, the karma of that pattern begins to weaken. After noticing comes replacing, not with toxic positivity, not with fantasy, but with clarity. You begin to introduce thoughts that align with your intention for the day, thoughts that support peace, generosity, strength. You don't repeat affirmations blindly. You choose reflections that feel true and train the mind toward them. For example, this moment is new. I don't have to repeat the past. May I meet today with presence. I am not my thoughts. These are not slogans. They are anchors. You repeat them not to escape thought, but to steer it. You also begin to see how quickly one thought attracts another. One self-critical idea pulls in another. One fear opens the door to more, but it works both ways. One grounded reflection creates space for others. Thought is not isolated. It is relational. It builds. And by choosing the first few consciously, you shape the entire structure. This doesn't mean you avoid difficult thoughts. It means you stop letting them lead. You let them arise, but you don't follow. You see anger, but you don't feed it. You hear fear, but you don't build on it. You return to the breath, to the body, to presence. And then you ask, what thought supports clarity in this moment? What mental habit supports freedom, not contraction? This practice becomes more powerful when you connect it to intention. Before starting your day, ask the mind to align with your values, not just in action, but in thought. May my thinking be rooted in compassion. May my mind create the conditions for peace, not harm. May my words today begin with thoughts that are true, necessary, and kind. This doesn't guarantee perfection. It creates direction. And direction, when repeated, becomes habit, becomes character, becomes a life. You also learn to work with triggers, the moments that pull you back into old thought loops, a certain task, a conversation, a memory. You start to see how quickly the mind can fall into old karma when those conditions arise. But now you have awareness. You recognize the pattern as it starts, and you don't shame yourself for it. You return to what's skillful. You remind yourself that awareness, not perfection, is the practice. Neuroscience confirms what Buddhism has taught for centuries. The mind is plastic. It changes with repetition. It doesn't care if the thought is helpful or harmful. It learns whatever you rehearse. That's why morning cognition matters so much. You're setting the stage, not just for mood, but for identity. And when you train the mind toward wholesome, wise, grounded thought first thing in the day, you're reducing the momentum of mental karma that leads to suffering. You don't need long hours to do this. Even 5 minutes of focused awareness on how you think, followed by intentional redirection, is enough to start weakening unskillful loops. You can journal. You can reflect silently. You can sit and listen to your own thoughts like waves, letting them pass. What matters is that you stop believing every thought is true. You begin to guide the process, not as control, but as care. You also learn to stay in the present moment with your thoughts. Most mental karma arises because of time, regret from the past, anxiety about the future. When you stay here, now, the mind loses its usual weapons. It softens, it breathes, and in that breathing you feel the difference between thinking and knowing, between looping and living. This process does not require you to become thoughtless. It invites you to become wise with thought. to use it as a tool, not as a cage, and to begin each day with the humility that what you think will ripple out into speech, into energy, into the subtle karma that shapes how you're received by the world. Because karma is not just in what you do, it's in how you see, how you frame, how you interpret. That framing begins with thought. And when you shift that framing toward truth, care, and clarity, everything begins to open. This is not an abstract practice. It's as immediate as the first story your mind tells when you wake up. You can meet that story with reaction or with presence, with continuation or with transformation. The choice, repeated daily, becomes your path. And that path, step by step, becomes freedom, not all at once, not without effort, but with each morning, each thought, each return. And once you begin to see that thought is not just noise, but karmic direction, once you learn to recognize the patterns that shape how you experience yourself and the world, something within begins to ask the next question. If what I think matters this much, then what about what I aim for? What about the goals I set, the visions I carry, the dreams I pursue? Are they just more fuel for the mind's craving, or can they be part of the path? Is it possible to want deeply, to build with energy, to strive with care, and still remain free? This is where the Buddhist understanding of intention, or satana, becomes central. Because Buddhism does not ask us to abandon ambition. It asks us to relate to it differently, with wisdom, with honesty, without clinging. In the early morning, before the engine of your day starts turning, there's a rare opportunity to meet your goals, not as pressure, but as practice. To start fresh, not with obsession, not with fear, but with clarity about what you are truly aiming toward and why. In the teachings, intention is not just the seed of action. It's the karma behind karma, the force that makes an action skillful or unskillful. What you do matters. But what matters even more is the why, the motivation, the root. You can speak gently out of fear or harshly out of love. You can chase a noble dream for shallow reasons or pursue a humble task with deep presence. The difference lives in intention. When you begin the day from this place, you look at your goals with new eyes, not as things that define your worth, not as conditions for happiness, but as expressions of care, of alignment. You can want to succeed, not to escape shame, but to serve something larger. You can work hard, not because you fear being behind, but because you feel called to contribute. The outer result might look the same, but inside, the energy is different, and energy is everything. Morning is the best time to examine that energy, because the mind is still open. The heart is not yet defensive. You can sit quietly and ask, what am I moving toward? Not what do I need to achieve to be okay, but what do I value enough to give myself to without losing myself? This question cuts through fantasy. It brings you back to purpose. You may have big goals. That's fine. Buddhism doesn't ask you to dream small. It asks you to dream without gripping, to care without needing control, to move forward without needing to manipulate every outcome. This is the middle way between apathy and obsession, a path where effort is consistent, but peace is not delayed. You begin by setting intentions that are rooted in values, not vanity. What kind of person do you want to be? regardless of what happens today. What kind of presence do you want to bring into your work, your relationships, your creative life? These intentions give you direction. They're not attached to outcome. They guide your choices without controlling your experience. This reframes failure. If the intention is clean, even when the result shifts, you remain centered. You can adapt, you can learn. You're not destroyed by changes, because your sense of meaning comes from how you walk the path, not where it ends. That flexibility is what protects you from burnout. Burnout doesn't come from effort. It comes from clinging to outcomes that were never in your full control. You also begin to see how certain goals are not truly yours. They've been inherited, picked up, absorbed from culture, family, media. The pressure to succeed, to prove, to become someone other than who you already are. When you slow down enough to meet your ambition with mindfulness, you can let go of goals that are built on fear. You can release the ones that never belong to you. And in that clearing, what remains is real. Quiet, maybe, but real. From here, you commit. But it's a different kind of commitment. You give yourself fully to the path while letting go of the craving for a specific result. You put your hands in the work, but you don't wrap your identity around the prize. This makes your actions cleaner, lighter, more honest. You don't use effort to cover insecurity. You use effort to express alignment. This practice also teaches you how to pause, to reflect, to recalibrate. If your goal starts to feel heavy, you don't just push harder. You check the intention again. Has it shifted? Is fear creeping in? Is attachment distorting the clarity that used to be there? These check-ins are part of the work. They keep you grounded. They bring the focus back to process, not just progress. You also begin to celebrate more, not because you reached the finish line, but because you showed up. You followed through. You practiced presence. This turns your daily actions into rituals, not just routines. You wake up and recommit, not to an image of success, but to integrity, to living your values even when no one's watching. That builds a strength no goal can give you, a strength that comes from being internally anchored. Mindful ambition also shifts how you relate to time. You stop rushing to get there. You realize that how you move matters as much as where you're going. You slow down enough to care about the quality of your attention. And in that slowness, paradoxically, you often get more done. Not by forcing, but by flowing. Because when your actions are aligned with clear intention, you waste less energy. There's less mental noise, less internal conflict, just movement, just clarity. And when obstacles come, which they will, you're not thrown off. You adapt. You stay in relationship with your purpose. You adjust course without collapsing. Because you're not building from ego. You're building from sincerity, from devotion to something deeper than recognition or reward. This way of living is sustainable. It doesn't require constant hype. It doesn't drain you. It feeds you. You wake up each morning not feeling behind, but connected, not chasing, but choosing. That shift turns ordinary goals into spiritual practice. You are not working just to achieve. You are working to wake up. And that wakefulness extends to how you treat others, because when you're not gripping your own ambition, you stop competing unconsciously. You celebrate others without comparison. You collaborate more easily. Your success becomes a shared experience, not a guarded one. Your ambition becomes generous, not grasping. Buddhism teaches that right intention leads to right action. That means your goals, when rooted in wisdom and compassion, become extensions of the path, not distractions from it. Even worldly goals, business, creativity, health, can be part of practice, if they are pursued with clarity, with kindness, and with non-attachment. Non-attachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care so much that you don't pollute your effort with fear. You move from love, not from lack, from presence, not pressure. That quality of action changes your relationship to yourself. You respect your own energy more. You stop overextending to meet unrealistic ideals. You honor rest. You balance effort with space. And when you fall short, you don't collapse into self-judgment. You return. You recommit. Because this path is not about perfection, it's about honesty. And honesty means seeing when you've gone off track and gently, firmly returning to what matters. This way of working, of creating, of pursuing becomes something sacred. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's infused with awareness. You know what you're doing, you know why, and you're willing to let the results unfold without forcing them. That surrender is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that the only thing fully in your control is the quality of your presence. And that presence, cultivated every morning through intention, becomes your most powerful tool. It shapes how you move, how you think, how you lead, how you love. And with that, the day is not something to conquer. It is something to meet, to honor, to walk with, one breath, one step, one clear intention at a time. And when you've rooted your goals in intention rather than attachment, when your drive no longer pulls you away from presence but rises from it, you begin to sense a deeper shift underneath all your choices. It's no longer just about what you want to achieve, it's about how you see everything you move through. The subtle filter behind your thoughts, your reactions, your beliefs. The quiet lens that decides what feels like a problem and what feels like a possibility. This shift isn't about effort, it's about perspective. And in Buddhism, that perspective has a name: right view. Right view is the first step of the Eightfold Path, and for a reason. Because how you see determines how you live, not in a poetic way, in a direct, neurological, day-to-day way. Your interpretations create your inner weather. Two people can face the same moment with two completely different experiences. The difference is not in the event, it's in the view. And if you want to walk through your day with less friction and more clarity, the most powerful time to start is when the mind is clean, first thing in the morning. This isn't about forcing yourself to be positive, it's about waking up and remembering what's true. That thoughts aren't facts, that conditions aren't fixed, that everything is changing, including this moment. Right view isn't a list of ideas to memorize. It's a way of seeing that brings your attention back to the deeper laws that govern experience. You begin by recalling the most essential truth. All things are impermanent. That includes your mood, your plans, your obstacles, your habits. This isn't a philosophical trick. It's a practical tool. When you feel stuck or heavy or irritated, right view reminds you, this is not the whole story. This will move. When that becomes your first thought of the day, The mind becomes more flexible. You stop reacting as if every emotion is a permanent verdict. You start observing instead of personalizing. The second layer of right view is understanding the nature of suffering, not as a pessimistic view, but as a doorway into compassion. Life brings pain. That's not failure, it's reality. But suffering is what happens when the mind resists that truth, when it wants things to be other than they are. When you wake up in the morning and instantly wish the moment were different, your body, your circumstances, your relationships, that resistance takes over your experience. Right view softens that resistance. It doesn't ask you to like everything. It asks you to meet it without pushing it away. To see discomfort as a teacher, not a punishment. This creates resilience, because the mind is no longer at war with what's happening. It becomes curious, open, willing to learn instead of control. Another part of right view is understanding cause and effect. Not in some abstract karmic sense, but right here. Every action, every word, every thought leads somewhere. When you wake up and remember this, your choices carry more care. You don't move through the day on autopilot. You pause. You ask, where does this lead? Is this thought helpful? Is this reaction aligned? Not from fear of doing something wrong, but from a deep respect for the power of every moment. This respect brings mindfulness into the center of your morning, because you're no longer rushing to act. You're observing to see clearly, and from that clarity, wisdom begins to guide you instead of habit. Wisdom doesn't speak loudly, but when the view is clean, you can hear it, and it usually points toward less reactivity, not more, toward more space, not less, toward compassion, even when it's inconvenient. Right view also transforms how you relate to others. Instead of seeing people as obstacles or sources of validation, you start to see them as beings just like you, navigating their own stress, confusion, hopes, and pain. This breaks the habit of projection. The mind stops assuming it knows others. It begins to meet them with humility. That humility turns into empathy. That empathy shapes how you speak, how you listen, how you respond under pressure. The Eightfold Path teaches that right view is not something you achieve once. It is something you return to again and again, especially in the morning, when the default view is so easy to slip into, the view shaped by fear, by judgment, by pressure. This is why the early hours are so powerful. You are choosing the lens before the world chooses it for you. And once you choose that lens, the rest of the path has a foundation. Right intention, right speech, right action. They all flow more naturally when your view is rooted in reality instead of illusion, in presence instead of fear. That's what makes this part of practice so vital. It's not about learning new thoughts. It's about clearing space so the mind sees clearly again. Right view is also what allows you to hold contradiction. You can want change while accepting what is. You can feel pain while remembering peace is still possible. You can plan your day with care and still understand that nothing is guaranteed. This makes your mind more stable, not rigid, but grounded. And that groundedness is what carries you through both joy and difficulty without being overwhelmed. When right view becomes part of your morning, you begin to feel it throughout the day. You're not pulled into drama as easily. You don't react to every inconvenience. You pause. You see. You remember. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You act when action is needed. You let go when it's not. You speak when your words can help. You remain silent when they can't. This discernment is a product of seeing clearly, and seeing clearly is a product of starting with the right lens. That's why cognitive reframing in Buddhism is not about thinking differently. It's about looking differently. And the best time to start training that is when the mind is soft, when it first wakes, before the stories have returned in full. You might start this practice by reading a short passage of Dharma in the morning, or repeating a reflection that grounds your view. Something like, "This is temporary. This is not personal. This is workable." You might sit for a few minutes and simply observe what the mind is doing, without judging, without following, just watching. That's enough. That small act of seeing begins to shift the mental posture, and from that shift, all your next decisions are influenced. The point is not to never fall into confusion again. The point is to see that confusion is not permanent. That clarity is a state you can return to. That right view is not a belief system. It's a way of coming back to what's true. And from that truth, the rest of your life begins to align, not perfectly, but honestly. And that honesty is what creates peace, because it frees you from illusion. It brings you into contact with life just as it is. And when you can meet life like that, without running, without clinging, you don't just see clearly. You begin to live clearly. And that clarity, first thing in the morning, becomes the foundation for a day shaped not by reaction, but by wisdom. Not by ego, but by awareness. And that kind of day doesn't just feel better. It becomes part of your path, a quiet revolution, one breath, one choice, one honest view at a time. And once you begin to live from right view, once your mornings are framed not by fear, but by clarity, not by grasping, but by wisdom, it becomes easier to notice just how quickly that clarity can slip away. You begin the day grounded, but within minutes, the world arrives at your fingertips. Notifications, messages, headlines, demands. You might reach for your phone without thinking, and suddenly, without realizing how or why, your attention is no longer yours. This is not a failure of discipline. It's a result of habit, a deeply conditioned impulse to fill space, to stimulate the mind before it even has a chance to breathe. And in Buddhism, this habit is not just a distraction, it is a source of suffering, because before you've connected to your breath, to your body, to your own mind, you're already entangled in the minds of others. You've entered their urgency before finding your own presence. You've replaced awareness with noise. This is where the practice of digital restraint becomes not just a productivity trick, but a spiritual discipline, a conscious act of protection. Not to reject technology, but to reclaim your morning, to give your nervous system space, to allow your first hour of wakefulness to be shaped by something more stable than scrolling. In Buddhist terms, this is about sense restraint, not in the rigid sense, but in the compassionate one. Choosing not to flood the mind when it's still sensitive. Choosing not to start the day in reactivity. The teachings of the Buddha often speak about guarding the sense doors, not to suppress experience, but to preserve clarity. The eyes, the ears, the mind itself, all are easily overwhelmed. And when the first thing you see in the morning is a screen filled with information, you're opening the mind too quickly. You're bypassing stillness. And once you've done that, it's hard to get it back. The first hour of your day sets your mental tone. It trains your attention in one direction or another. If the first thing you do is check your phone, you've already told the mind to look outward, to react, to chase. If instead you begin by turning inward, toward breath, toward reflection, toward presence, you've given the mind something rare, space to settle before being pulled. And this space is not passive. It's not emptiness for its own sake. It is preparation, a way to meet the day from within, not from fragmentation. When you remove digital input first thing in the morning, you begin to notice what's actually happening inside you. Not someone else's opinion, not the latest tragedy, not your inbox, but your own state, your body, your mood, your intention. Without the phone, you wake up to yourself. That self-awareness, cultivated gently, becomes a form of compassion. Because the phone does not just give you information, it trains your emotional patterns. Every swipe is a habit, every scroll a choice. And when you delay that interaction, even by 30 minutes, you are reducing the impact of reactivity. You are giving your brain time to come online without stress. You are allowing the mind to meet the world, not hide from it. In neuroscience, this matters. When you wake up, your brain is in a naturally receptive state. The prefrontal cortex is not yet dominant. The limbic system is still active. This means that early stimulation has a stronger effect. What you consume emotionally first thing becomes a template for the rest of the day. If you start with tension, the nervous system will be more reactive. If you start with quiet, the nervous system learns calm. The phone, though helpful, is designed to hijack attention. It is not neutral, it's engineered for engagement, not equanimity. Every color, vibration, and notification is meant to stimulate craving. And craving is the root of suffering. That's not theory, it's the core of the Buddha's insight. By waking up and engaging digital content immediately, you're reinforcing craving before you've even stood up. You're training the mind to need stimulation instead of cultivating stillness. Avoiding the phone in the first hour becomes an intentional act of renunciation, not as punishment, but as protection. You're not avoiding reality. You're preparing to meet it clearly. You're strengthening the mind's capacity to observe before it reacts. This builds resilience. Because later, when the phone is used, you are using it, not being used by it. This practice also creates time for what matters. Without the immediate pull of digital input, your morning can be shaped by reflection, by journaling, by walking slowly, by sitting with the breath, by feeling your emotions without distraction. These small actions build mental muscle. They teach the mind that it doesn't need to be filled in order to be okay. That attention can rest. That presence is already enough. And when presence is enough, everything changes. You stop chasing likes. You stop measuring yourself by how quickly you respond. You stop needing to know everything the moment it happens. This loosening of attachment brings peace. And that peace, once tasted in the morning, carries through the day. This also deepens your relationship with intention. Without external input, you remember what you care about, not what the news wants you to care about, not what social media pushes, but what actually aligns with your values. You start your day with choice, not compulsion. And that builds self-trust. The knowledge that you can pause, you can wait. You don't have to escape your life through a screen. The discipline of delaying digital input also trains attention. When you don't start the day in fragmented consumption, your focus strengthens. You can stay with one task longer. You can listen more fully. You can engage without distraction. This is not about rejecting technology. It's about right relationship with it, using it wisely from a place of clarity. In Buddhist ethics, wise livelihood is not only about what you do for work, it's about how you engage with the world. The phone is part of that world, and how you use it reflects your state of mind. Starting the day with restraint helps ensure that your engagement is ethical, thoughtful, and not driven by compulsion. This kind of practice also supports emotional regulation, because so much of what we consume first thing in the morning is emotionally charged. A message that triggers worry, a post that triggers envy, a headline that triggers fear. Without the time to process, these reactions live in the body all day. But when you delay input, you give yourself a buffer, a chance to regulate, to reflect, to choose how you want to feel. And that choice is power, the ability to say, "Not yet," to know that the world can wait a little while, that presence comes first, that the mind deserves silence before sound. This power doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be consistent. 10 minutes, 20, 60. Whatever is possible, you begin there. And from there, you build a new rhythm. Over time, this rhythm changes your default. The urge to check becomes less urgent. The need to fill space fades. You begin to see mornings not as time to catch up, but as time to come home, to return to the body, to feel the breath, to prepare for the world, not be swallowed by it. This is not resistance. This is respect for the mind, for the heart, for the sacredness of attention. And when that attention is honored, your life begins to shift, not through dramatic change, but through one quiet hour at a time, one phone left face down, one morning reclaimed, one mind allowed to settle before it speaks. That is the practice, and that practice, over time, becomes who you are, present, clear, awake, before the world even knows you're up. And when you no longer hand over your first hour to the digital world, when your eyes stay on the breath rather than the screen, the world doesn't disappear. It becomes gentler. You're not overwhelmed by noise because you've chosen not to invite it. But this restraint, as powerful as it is, can go even deeper. Beneath the avoidance of distraction lies something even more profound: the absence of speech. Not just external silence, but intentional stillness. A silence you choose, not because there's nothing to say, but because presence itself becomes enough. This is the spirit behind the silent precept. Known in Buddhism as noble silence, it's not just the absence of sound. It's a state of conscious restraint, of honoring the early morning not as a task, but as a sanctuary. You wake, but you don't rush to fill the space with words. You rise, but you don't immediately speak. Instead, you let silence shape your attention. You let it hold your awareness without interruption. Noble silence is a precept practiced by monastics, especially during retreats. But it has a place in daily life too, especially in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking, when the mind is still delicate and the heart is still open. It's a time when thoughts begin forming but haven't hardened into stories. Speech when used carelessly, can close that space too quickly. Words can become a wall, but silence allows the mind to settle. It gives the body time to wake slowly, naturally, without rush, without defense. When you wake and stay silent, you are no longer performing. You're not explaining anything. You're not responding to anyone. This frees the nervous system from pressure. It creates space where you can meet your thoughts before they become speech. You begin to observe not only what arises, but how much of what we say is habitual, unconscious, unnecessary. Silence creates distance between sensation and reaction. It gives the mind a buffer. You don't speak the first thing that comes up. You don't narrate your way into existence. You let yourself simply be. And in that being, you begin to feel something sacred, a presence that doesn't need words to validate itself. This isn't about suppressing your voice. It's about choosing when to use it. About recognizing that the first voice you hear each morning doesn't need to be yours. It can be silence itself. The rhythm of your breath, the sound of the room, the awareness of the present moment, uninterrupted. Noble silence also helps you listen more deeply to your thoughts, your body, your emotional state. When you don't speak, you notice more. You hear the tension in your jaw. You feel the rhythm of your steps. You become aware of how much noise lives inside, even when there's no one around. And that awareness is not a problem. It's insight. It teaches you where your restlessness lives, where your mind tries to escape, where the urge to talk covers the discomfort of being still. By not speaking, you give that discomfort room to breathe. You stop pushing it away with noise. You meet it. You feel it fully. And slowly, without needing to fix it, something shifts. The silence becomes less threatening, more familiar, more spacious. What was once emptiness becomes presence. This kind of silence also changes how you relate to others. When you begin the day in quiet, you carry that quiet into your interactions. You speak more thoughtfully. You listen more fully. You're not trying to dominate the space with your voice. You bring awareness to your words, your tone, your timing. Speech becomes intentional, not automatic. There's also less regret. Because when silence is part of your morning, your first words are less likely to come from reactivity. You've given the mind time to ground. You've allowed emotion to settle. The speech that arises from this space is clearer, kinder, less impulsive. This reduces the need to repair what was said in haste. It creates a smoother emotional rhythm for the day ahead. Practicing noble silence also strengthens mindfulness, because it's not passive. You're not tuning out, you're tuning in. Each movement becomes an object of awareness. Washing your face, making tea, tying your shoes. When you're not speaking, you notice these small acts more fully. They no longer get lost behind a stream of words. They become your practice, your way of remembering what's real. This can be especially powerful if you live with others. Practicing silence doesn't mean ignoring them. It means agreeing to hold space together. A quiet morning can be shared. It can be a form of respect. A way to start the day, not in conflict or commentary, but in stillness. Even 5 minutes of shared silence can bring more connection than 10 minutes of distracted talking. You can support this practice by setting a simple structure. Decide the duration of your silence before the day begins. Maybe it's 20 minutes. Maybe it's an hour. During this time, refrain not only from speaking, but also from writing, texting, consuming sound. Let all language rest. You're not removing communication, you're shifting it inward, toward direct experience, toward unfiltered awareness. This does not mean isolating yourself emotionally. You're not cutting off connection. You're deepening it, starting with yourself. Because silence is not empty. It is full of seeing, feeling, knowing. It allows you to connect to your inner life without interruption. And the more you practice this, the more silence becomes a refuge, not something to avoid, but something to return to. In the modern world, silence is rare. And because it's rare, it can feel uncomfortable at first. But discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of detox. The mind is adjusting to a new rhythm, one that doesn't rely on noise to feel alive, one that doesn't need validation from speech to feel real. Over time, you'll find that silence reveals more than words ever could. It shows you your mental habits, your emotional weather, your cravings, your peace, all without commentary. And once you can meet all of that in the morning, without needing to speak, you've developed a skill that very few people have: the ability to sit with life as it is. This ability changes your decisions. It softens your reactions. It makes you less likely to argue, to complain, to speak just to avoid feeling. You don't have to fill every space. You begin to trust the value of quiet, and that trust ripples outward into how you work, how you relate, how you live. Noble silence is not about being silent forever. It's about remembering that silence is part of your practice, that words should arise from presence, not replace it, that the first sound of your day doesn't have to be your voice. It can be the sound of attention itself. And when your day begins in that soundless space, what follows has more clarity, more meaning, more ease. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer running from it. You are meeting it, quietly, clearly, and completely awake. And when you begin your morning in silence, when you offer your attention before offering your voice, the inner world has room to reveal itself. You're no longer lost in conversation or external noise. You're not reacting to headlines or inboxes. You are simply watching what arises: thoughts, moods, memories, sensations. You are present with the unfolding of the moment. And in that unfolding, something else begins to appear: the sense of self returning, the feeling of me coming back online after sleep. But where does that self come from? And what exactly is it made of? This is where the Buddha's teaching on the 5 aggregates becomes a powerful lens. The aggregates, or skandhas, are not abstract philosophy. They are the building blocks of your everyday experience. They make up what you call you, but none of them, alone or together, can truly be grasped as a fixed identity. And the early morning, when consciousness is just beginning to reassemble itself, offers a rare opportunity to watch this construction happen in real time. Before the mind picks up its usual speed, before habit fills the space, you can observe each aggregate as it reappears, and in doing so, start to understand that the self is not a single thing, but a process. The first aggregate is form, your physical body. When you wake, you feel the weight of your limbs, the temperature of the room, the rhythm of breath. These sensations seem to confirm that you are here. But pause and notice. What is actually being experienced? Pressure, warmth, breath. These are sensations, not identity. You are not the body. You are aware of it. The body is real, but it's not you. It is changing moment by moment. It ages, shifts, breaks down. If you cling to it as the self, suffering is inevitable. But when you see it as part of the process, you begin to relate to it with care instead of ownership. The second aggregate is feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. When you first wake up, there's often a rush of sensations: comfort, stiffness, drowsiness, restlessness. The mind immediately wants to react. I feel good today, or I don't want to get up. But if you slow down, you can see that feeling is not fixed. It moves quickly. What seemed like resistance a moment ago fades after a stretch or a sip of water. Feeling arises in response to contact between the senses and their objects, but it doesn't define who you are. It's simply part of the stream. The third aggregate is perception. This is the mind's ability to recognize and label what it experiences. When you wake up and see the light filtering through the curtains, when you hear the birds, when you remember what day it is, this is perception at work. It helps you orient, but it also filters. It turns raw experience into concepts. It tells you, this is my bedroom, that's my partner, today is Monday. Useful, yes, but also limited. Because perception shapes your view before you've consciously chosen it. It's automatic. And when left unchecked, it becomes a lens that hides as much as it reveals. The fourth aggregate is mental formations, thoughts, habits, emotions, will. These are the patterns that determine your reactions, the ideas that arise, the plans that unfold before your feet even hit the floor. This is where identity often roots itself most strongly. The inner voice says, I'm not ready. I have too much to do. I need coffee. I feel anxious. But when you look closely, you see that these are just movements. Mental weather. They are not permanent, not reliable, and not you. They come from conditions, sleep, memory, hormones, yesterday's conversation, and they go, often just as quickly. When you watch them rather than believe them, space opens. You are no longer trapped in the storyline. The fifth aggregate is consciousness. This is the awareness that knows all the others, the knowing of form, of feeling, of perception, of thought. It seems to be the most you of all, but even this changes. When you are in deep sleep, there is no consciousness of form. When you dream, it shifts. When you are fully awake, it returns. And even during the day, attention moves constantly. Consciousness is not one thing. It arises and falls depending on contact and focus. It is real, but it is not independent. Taken together, these 5 aggregates make up what we commonly call the self. But the more you observe them, the more clearly you see that none of them, on their own or combined, can be grasped as a permanent I. They are processes, events, conditions arising and passing. This insight doesn't remove your identity. It frees it. It allows you to hold who you are with more space, more compassion, more flexibility. In the early morning, when these aggregates are still gentle, when the sense of self is only just reassembling, you have a chance to watch the illusion before it solidifies. You feel a thought arise, and instead of claiming it, you say, "Mental formation is arising." You notice the warmth of the blanket, and you say, "Form is being felt." You recognize the light in the room and name it as perception. And all the while, you observe without grasping. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It's intimacy without illusion. You are not disconnecting from life. You are entering it more fully, more honestly. Seeing that the self is a collection of conditions doesn't make you less human. It makes you more free. Free from the need to protect a fragile ego. Free from the shame of imperfection. Free from the anxiety that you must always be the same. This kind of practice changes your mornings. You no longer wake into a role. You wake into a process. One that can be observed, guided, cared for. You begin the day not by reinforcing an identity, but by softening into awareness. You respond to your body with kindness, not demand. You greet your mind with interest, not judgment. You start to see that the idea of I that drives so much suffering is thinner than it seems. And this view changes how you interact with others. If your self is not fixed, neither is theirs. You stop holding people to rigid definitions. You stop expecting them to match your stories. You see them as aggregates too, as changing, complex, alive. This makes you more forgiving, more open, more curious. It dissolves the need to win, to be right, to protect your identity at all costs. Mourning becomes a place of gentle investigation, not to pick yourself apart, but to loosen what doesn't need to be held so tightly. You are not your thought. You are not your feeling. You are not your role. You are the field in which these things rise and fall. And when you know this deeply, even for a moment, your day begins from clarity, not confusion, from spaciousness, not contraction, from freedom, not habit. This is the gift of the aggregates, not to define you, but to reveal the truth behind your experience. A truth that is soft, flexible, grounded, and awake. A truth that can only be seen when the mind is quiet enough to observe it. And there is no better time to observe than in that sacred window between sleep and action, when everything is just beginning to return. And you, if you are paying attention, can meet it all with eyes wide open and with no self to defend. And once you've seen how the self forms and reforms each morning, once you've watched the body, feeling, perception, thought, and awareness arise not as who you are, but as what is happening, something shifts in how you relate to experience itself. You stop holding life so tightly. You begin to notice the threads that hold everything together, the causes, the conditions, the people, the unseen effort behind the ordinary. And in that noticing, a deeper kind of gratitude begins to form, one not rooted in lists or fleeting feelings, but in the direct understanding that nothing in this life exists alone. Gratitude, in the Buddhist tradition, is not just a pleasant emotional state. It is a practice, a way of waking up, a way of seeing. And it goes far beyond the modern self-help version that focuses on naming a few nice things before breakfast. While that may have benefits, Buddhist gratitude is not simply about feeling good. It's about remembering what is real. It's about uncovering interdependence and using that insight to generate compassion. This kind of gratitude becomes part of the bodhisattva path, not as an afterthought, but as an active fuel for living in service to others. When you wake in the morning and the sense of self is still soft, this is a perfect time to reflect not just on what you have, but on what makes having possible. Before the brain starts racing, before routine hardens, you can sit with a single breath and ask, how did this moment come to be? Who labored so I could be warm? Who harvested the tea I will drink? What unseen forces gave rise to this opportunity to sit here, safe, breathing, alive? This line of inquiry takes you beyond preference. Gratitude is no longer about what you like. It becomes a recognition of dependency. You begin to see that nothing about your morning exists in isolation. The water from the faucet passed through pipes maintained by workers you've never met. The phone by your bed was made by hundreds of hands. The silence around you, if you're lucky enough to have it, was shaped by countless moments of history and circumstance. Even your body, which you so often judge, is performing miracles simply to get you out of bed. This kind of gratitude humbles you. It quiets entitlement. It slows the desire for more and turns attention toward what already is. And in that turning, the heart begins to open, not just in appreciation, but in responsibility. Because once you recognize how much you've received, the question naturally arises, how can I give? How can I live in a way that honors what has been given to me? The Bodhisattva path is defined by this very movement, not towards self-satisfaction, but towards service, not through guilt, but through gratitude. True gratitude doesn't stop at thank you. It flows outward. It motivates action. It refines speech. It shapes how you listen, how you care, how you show up in moments that might otherwise feel small or inconvenient. In this way, gratitude becomes a practice of remembering others. You begin your day not with affirmations about how great your life is, but with the awareness that your life is interwoven with all life, that your comfort is made possible by effort, that your survival is made possible by countless causes, many of which will remain invisible forever. And this doesn't make you feel guilty. It makes you feel connected. You begin to extend that recognition beyond the obvious. Gratitude expands to include challenges, not as spiritual bypassing, but as understanding. The hard moments become part of your path because they show you where you're still clinging. The person who annoys you becomes part of your practice because they reveal what's unresolved in your own mind. Even discomfort can be held with gratitude, not because you want it to stay, but because you can now see it without pushing it away. This way of seeing turns the whole day into a field of practice. You brush your teeth with gratitude for water. You eat with gratitude for those who made your meal possible. You walk with gratitude for the strength in your legs, even if they ache. You listen with gratitude that you have ears to hear. Each moment becomes a reminder that you are not separate, not independent, not self-made. You are supported, and from that awareness, compassion becomes natural. Because if you are supported, so is everyone else. If your comfort depends on others, so does theirs. You begin to understand suffering not as personal failure, but as shared condition. You look at others with less judgment, more curiosity, more care. Because you no longer see only what they are, you see what holds them, what they're moving through, what they carry. This depth of gratitude also dissolves comparison. You stop measuring your life against someone else's highlight reel because you are grounded in what is real. You are no longer chasing better. You are honoring what is, and in that honoring, joy begins to rise, not the kind that needs praise, but the kind that sees clearly, the kind that recognizes that this breath, this step, this cup of tea is enough. Gratitude as a bodhisattva practice is also protective. It shields the heart from cynicism. It doesn't deny pain, but it remembers balance. That even in grief there can be beauty, that even in failure there is learning. It helps you hold life's weight with both hands, not with false cheer, but with grounded strength. This strength is what allows you to give without burning out, because your generosity doesn't come from depletion. It comes from fullness, from knowing you have been given much and you are simply passing it on. Gratitude fuels this. It reminds you that life is movement, that what you offer will ripple in ways you can't see. You don't need elaborate rituals to practice this. You need awareness, reflection, a willingness to feel. As you wake, instead of rushing into tasks or lists, sit for a few breaths. Name what supports you. Let your mind wander through the chain of causes that make this moment possible, not as a chore, but as devotion, as remembrance. This remembrance brings reverence for life, for your place in it, for the impermanence that makes it so vivid. You start to see ordinary things as extraordinary, not because they change, but because you're finally present enough to see them, and that presence changes how you live. You become more careful with your speech, more patient with delays, more forgiving when others fall short. Because gratitude makes room. It softens the need to control. It opens the space where compassion can breathe. And this opening is not theoretical. It's lived. It's in how you wake up, how you greet the morning, how you pour your tea, how you meet others with attention instead of agenda. Gratitude makes your life less about performance and more about presence. You stop proving. You start participating. The more you practice, the more it deepens. Gratitude stops being an emotion. It becomes a way of seeing, a way of being, a natural response to the reality of interdependence. And from that place, even the smallest act becomes sacred. A smile, a deep breath, a simple thank you. And this simplicity is where freedom lives, because you are no longer chasing more, you are living from enough. That is the heart of gratitude on the Bodhisattva path. Not a feeling to chase, but a truth to return to, again and again, until it becomes the way you see, the way you speak, the way you love. And when gratitude becomes that, a quiet vow lived through your body, every morning becomes a ceremony. Every step becomes part of your offering. Every moment becomes part of your return. And once gratitude becomes your lens, once your morning begins, not with craving, but with reverence, there's a subtle shift in how you approach everything that follows. You stop rushing past the small moments. You start noticing the quiet pivots, the instant you choose to pause, the breath you decide to follow, the moment you hold your reaction just a little longer. These small choices often go unnoticed, but they carry weight. They echo through the rest of the day, and in Buddhist teaching, they are not insignificant. They are karma in motion. Not karma as cosmic punishment or reward, but karma as cause and effect, subtle, constant, and always unfolding. It's not just the big decisions that shape your path. It's the little ones, the ones that feel harmless, the ones that feel automatic. And few illustrate this better than the first seemingly minor act of your day, whether or not you hit the snooze button. This choice, simple on the surface, is not just about 5 more minutes of sleep. It's a symbol of relationship, with time, with discipline, with intention. It reveals whether you're in conversation with your own values or letting comfort make the decision for you. In that moment, what matters isn't right or wrong. What matters is awareness. Do you see the ripple forming? Each morning begins with these micro decisions. They aren't always dramatic, but they are directional. You choose to get out of bed when the alarm rings, or you choose to delay. You reach for your breath, or you reach for your phone. You speak with mindfulness, or you fill the space with unnecessary noise. And each of these choices conditions the next. A thought repeated becomes a mood. A mood repeated becomes a tendency. A tendency lived becomes karma. This is why the Buddha taught so carefully about intention. Every action begins not in movement, but in the mind. When you decide to snooze out of habit, without awareness, that habit deepens. You train your mind to avoid discomfort, to delay clarity, to negotiate presence. But if you wake up and pause, not to force yourself, but to notice, you start to reclaim choice. And that choice begins to reshape the karma you live by. The beauty of this teaching is that it gives power to the ordinary. It removes the illusion that growth is found only in major life changes. It shows that the foundation of transformation is built in the quiet corners of your day. Karma is created not in abstract ideals, but in the repetition of small decisions made with or without awareness. Waking up becomes your first moment of practice. Your body is soft, your mind is open, and in that openness, you have a chance to plant direction. The choice to sit up with care instead of hitting snooze becomes an act of intention. Not because waking is morally superior, but because it reflects a willingness to meet life rather than delay it. It strengthens your ability to face what arises without resistance. This strength compounds, because how you start becomes how you move. A morning that begins with unconscious avoidance often continues that way. You rush, you react, you run late and blame time. But a morning that begins with conscious action, even if small, builds a kind of momentum. You're not just awake, you're aligned. You know why you're doing what you're doing. These moments also shape how you speak to yourself. When you delay your own intention, even in subtle ways, the mind learns a pattern. I can't be trusted. I say I'll wake, but I don't. I say I'll meditate, but I skip it. These thoughts may be quiet, but they become part of your mental architecture, and that self-doubt spills into other areas: work, relationships, creativity. Not as one event, but as accumulated karma from 1,000 micro moments. But the opposite is also true. When you act with intention, even if you still feel tired, even if it's hard, you reinforce integrity. You tell the mind, I said I would, and I did. That message builds confidence, not in outcome, but in alignment. And that alignment shows up later when the day gets messy. You're more likely to pause before reacting. You're more likely to honor your commitments, not out of force, but because you've trained that response in small ways. This is why awareness in the morning matters so much. You don't need to have a perfect routine. You need to have presence. You need to see that your first few choices are not isolated. They are the seeds of your day's karma. They shape how you think, how you feel, and how you interact. They ripple outward, often silently, until they become the tone of your entire life. Even things as small as how you brush your teeth, how you prepare breakfast, how you greet the people around you. These are all fields of karma. They're not mechanical. They are invitations. You can choose to act with clarity, or you can reinforce old patterns. Each moment is a fork in the road, not in what happens, but in how you meet it. And when you see this clearly, guilt becomes unnecessary. There's no need to punish yourself for past habits. There's only the next breath, the next choice, the next direction. Karma isn't fixed. It's fluid. It bends with intention. You are shaping it every time you return to presence, every time you choose clarity over habit. This turns your entire morning into a living practice. You're no longer rushing through it to get to the important part of your day. You're seeing that this is the important part, that how you live here is how you will live later, that every act has a ripple, and that ripple always begins in thought, in choice, in attention. Even delays, when held with awareness, can become part of the practice. If you do hit snooze, you can notice the sensation that led to it. Was it resistance? Was it fear? Was it kindness to your body? What's important isn't the behavior, it's the consciousness behind it. You meet it, you feel it, and you respond from there. This is the essence of mindfulness, not perfection, but intimacy with experience. Over time, you begin to sense the momentum of your mornings, not in a controlling way, but in a relational one. You're building a friendship with your life. You're learning its rhythms. And as you do, you start to see where certain actions always lead. You notice that checking your phone first thing tends to scatter your mind, that eating in silence tends to ground it, that rushing brings tension, that breathing brings space. And in that, noticing, your choices become easier. Not because you're forcing discipline, but because you're aligned with consequence. You've seen the ripples enough to know which ones lead to peace. And that knowledge, lived, not intellectual, is what transforms karma from theory into path. So the next time your alarm goes off, pause, not to judge, but to choose, to feel the energy behind the next movement, to recognize that this is not just a morning routine. This is the shaping of your mind, your energy, your life. And from that recognition, your morning becomes a mirror, not showing you who you were, but revealing who you're becoming. One breath, one choice, one ripple at a time. And now, here you are, at the end of this journey, but truly at the beginning of a new way to wake up. For over 3 hours, we've walked through breath and silence, intention and presence. We've explored the space between sleep and action, between identity and awareness, between craving and clarity. And what you've just heard isn't just knowledge, it's a blueprint, a daily invitation to return, to rise not out of habit, but out of purpose. To meet your first breath, not with panic, but with power. To move through your morning, not reacting, but responding, with attention, with compassion, and with deep alignment. Whether you start by observing your breath, honoring silence, questioning the self, or simply resisting the snooze button, every small step you take in those early hours creates ripples. Tiny choices, steady practice, real freedom. If something in this resonated with you, one sentence, one practice, one shift, I want to hear about it. What's one part of your morning you're going to change? Leave it in the comments below. Your words might be the spark for someone else's transformation. And if you found even a moment of clarity here, consider subscribing. This space is about more than content. It's about community. It's about returning to the path, together, one breath at a time. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your practice. May your mornings be wise, your days grounded, and your heart always open. See you in the next one.